Chapter 1, Sorting Ceremony.
Susan Pence.
In the beautifully decorated Great Hall, a wrinkled hat with a gaping mouth that split at the edges was rapping and wiggling erratically. Occasionally, a few fearless young wizards would pinch the brim of the hat, causing them to laugh strangely. As the names of the students and the house they were assigned to were announced by the sorting hat, the young wizards at the bottom of the table clapped enthusiastically or perfunctorily. Even Gryffindor and Slytherin, who disliked each other, maintained this relative harmony at least during this orientation. Below the stage, the young wizards and witches who were waiting to be assigned to their respective houses watched nervously and expectantly as the others put on their sorting hats and made their way to their house seats. However, among the new students, there was a skinny boy who looked out of place. He was looking around at the gorgeous and vintage decorations and the candles that were strangely suspended in midair. The bright sparks lit up the hall, and translucent ghosts could be seen flying around. The boy could not adapt to everything for a while.
Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing?
Strange, I thought I was dying in a hospital bed.
A high-pitched female voice rang out in the great hall just as the boy was becoming familiar and strange with his surroundings.
Ivan Hales.
Ivan Hales.
Professor Minerva McGonagall stood at the corner table where the sorting hat was placed and looked at the parchment scroll in her hand. However, after waiting for a long time and seeing that the new students were not coming up, she frowned and read aloud again. Ivan Hales. It had been a long time since there had been any movement among the new students, and now even Dumbledore was looking at them in confusion.
Who's Ivan? Who's got the nerve? You didn't go the wrong way and miss the sorting. This is going to be interesting.
Under the watchful eyes of many professors and seniors, the remaining new students took a few steps back, leaving behind the boy with golden hair and black eyes who was still in a daze.
Mr. Ivan Hales, please come to the stage.
Professor McGonagall repeated.
May.
Ivan pointed at himself in confusion, suddenly finding the scene strange but surprisingly familiar.
Yes, please come up as soon as possible, will you, just as everyone else has done.
Perhaps because Ivan was a new student, Professor McGonagall didn't seem upset when she asked the question for the fourth time, although she thought the new student might be nervous. Before Ivan could react, he felt himself being gently pushed, and the new students in the front row pushed him onto the stage one by one.
All right, child, come over here.
Professor McGonagall stepped forward and placed her hand on Ivan's shoulder, forcing him to sit down. She then placed her sorting hat on Ivan's head. The sorting hat fidgeted on Ivan's head and spoke in a rather funny manner.
Hey kid, don't be too shy. You're not the first to get nervous in a place like this.
Ivan rolled his eyes. After spending some time at the new student's office, he had some ideas about what was going on, but he found them hard to believe. But was this really Hogwarts, the magical place where magic was taught, but wasn't that?
Yes.
The sorting hat droned on, its gaping mouth almost reaching the brim of its hat. The sorting hat's ability to read memories stopped Ivan from thinking too much, and he quickly composed himself. However, perhaps due to the effects of the sorting hat, Ivan's mind was like a slideshow, with strange memories flashing through his mind. Even Ivan himself could not piece the scattered memories together. It was as if a witch was teaching him magic.
Cough, cough.
Seeing that the sorting hat seemed to be going on forever, Professor McGonagall coughed lightly and reminded the sorting hat on the stage to get to work. The hat finally stopped talking, and Ivan breathed a sigh of relief, although he was curious about which house he would be assigned to.
Well,
The sorting hat intoned, then suddenly lowered his voice.
and a bit of the dark arts.
Ivan hazily recalled.
Oh yes, an ancient and rare.
The sorting hat whispered to Ivan as if they were having a private conversation.
Of course, it also seems to me to be an interesting piece of dark magic, which allows you to see things you don't want to see.
Although Dumbledore must not have wanted anyone to do it again.
So where do I go, Slytherin?
Ivan was curious about his dark magic, but the sorting was the main issue. He was only able to remove the damned memory-reading hat after they had been sorted. Of the four great houses at Hogwarts, Gryffindor required bravery or recklessness, and Ravenclaw required wisdom or a desire for knowledge. Slytherin corresponded to a cunning and treacherous personality and an exceptional magical talent. As for Hufflepuff,
No, 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 none of that.
the Sorting Hat's tone was suddenly humorous.
Although it pains you to say so, Slytherin usually chooses only gifted young wizards, so.
The Sorting Hat's high-pitched voice, which had been whispering to Ivan, rang through the hall.
Gryffindor.
Ivan asked as he pulled the Sorting Hat off his head. He was so surprised that he didn't even have time to comment on the Sorting Hat's assessment of his talent.
Yes.
The Sorting Hat vowed.
I've never been wrong, and you have the right qualities.
Chapter 2, Academy Legend. Before Ivan could ask any more questions, the crowd erupted in applause. Ivan had no choice but to swallow his questions, place his Sorting Hat on the four-cornered table, and head down the stairs. When Ivan arrived, the older Gryffindor students moved aside to make room for him. A pair of identical twins with fiery red hair pressed Ivan to the empty seat in the middle of the room.
God, I'll bet you're the first person who's ever disrespected Professor McGonagall in a freshman division ceremony. It's...
Ivan asked.
How very brave.
The other twin said, taking over.
You are destined to be a legend in the house.
They said in unison, looking at each other. Ivan almost choked on his own breath when he heard their answer. The brothers' minds were so strange that he could not understand them.
Well, thank you.
Ivan said, politely thanking the twins for their blessing.
My name is Ivan Hales, what's yours? I'm George Weasley, and that's Fred over there.
One of the twins said, winking at Ivan.
You do well to remember that the next time you see him, don't mistake him. Fred hates it when people call him by the wrong name.
Ivan said, turning to the other twin. She knew all about the brothers' swapping of identities.
Don't you agree, Fred?
Fred, who had wanted to trick a new student with his brother, was stunned. George, who had spoken to Ivan earlier, was also stunned.
Wait, how did you know I was George's? It's easy to guess, isn't it? Everyone among the new students knows you Weasley brothers are into mischief.
Ivan, of course, could not say that he had read about it in a book, so he made up an excuse.
Oh my God, are we that famous already? Even the new students know about us.
George and Fred exclaimed, overwhelmed by the results of their years of struggle against Hogwarts' rules. Ron nearly spat out the food he was eating. When did his brothers become so famous among the new students at Hogwarts? Why didn't he know? George and Fred, on the other hand, were curious as to what Ivan was whispering to the Sorting Hat on stage. Ivan managed to brush it off with half-truths. After all, it was not something to be proud of in Gryffindor House when one knew dark magic. In passing, Ivan changed the subject to George and Fred's adventures at Hogwarts, making discreet inquiries about the locations and information of the various secret passages at Hogwarts. Ivan, having read the book, naturally knew that George and Fred had a magical map that showed most of the secret passages of Hogwarts and marked the names of the people inside. With it, one could travel freely through the castle without fear of being discovered by the professor or the caretaker. Although Ivan had read the book in his previous life and knew many of Hogwarts' secrets, this map was useful because he could not remember everything he saw. The Weasley brothers, in the face of Ivan's fanboy-like personality, naturally revealed a lot of information, and even tried to rope Ivan into their mischief. However, nothing about the magical map was revealed. Ivan was not surprised. After all, it was the first time they had met, and no matter how well they had talked, it was impossible for her to reveal such an important secret. Ivan was merely trying to build a good rapport with him to set the stage for the future. It was then, however, that Ivan heard a strange voice in his head. Ding, host has obtained confidential information. Mission in progress.
A fear spell made of magical objects.
Chapter 3, Broken Memory. A heart-wrenching blow to the face. Or burn them with a fierce fire. Ivan shuddered at the thought of the possible tragedy and tried to retrieve the memories of the original Ivan. Perhaps due to the transmigration, the memories seemed to have been scattered and hidden away somewhere, and Ivan could not find them.
Darn it, I wish I had more memories.
Ivan muttered to himself, feeling a headache coming on. It seemed that he would have to learn how to perform Dementory before the end of term, and then find a way to use the pensive in the headmaster's office to sort through his memories. Otherwise, he might be exposed. Now, Ivan doesn't even know where his home is.
Harry Potter.
While Ivan's mind was occupied with how to sneak into the restricted section and learn how to perform Dementor, Professor McGonagall's high-pitched voice drew his attention back to the sorting ceremony. Ivan was not the only one. At that moment, all the young wizards and professors turned their attention to the stage, as if they were reliving the moment when Ivan came to power. However, it was clear that Ivan's special status could not be compared to the prestige of the savior. As a skinny, bespectacled young wizard took the stage, there was a great deal of applause from the audience. The second-year Gryffindors standing next to Ivan clapped their hands so hard that they were red in the face. They stared at Ivan's forehead, which was partially covered by his hair, as if they expected to see a lightning bolt scar.
Harry Potter, is she talking about that Harry Potter?
My mother says he defeated you-know-who at birth.
I wish he'd been sorted into Gryffindor.
Ivan joined in the applause, as it would have been very unconventional to sit at this table. Ivan, of course, felt that Harry deserved the honor, as his tragic childhood of being bullied stemmed from the death of his parents. If not for Lily Potter sacrificing her life to cast a protective spell that rendered the powerful Lord Voldemort powerless, who knows how many more people would have died in the wizarding world.
Potter, we have Potter.
And Slytherin's applause was much softer. This was especially true of Prefect Slytherin, who was sitting in the front row, and was visibly upset when he heard from the sorting hat that Harry had refused to enter Slytherin. Yvonne took it all in silently, her lips curling up in a smile, knowing that this was because of the aura of Harry Potter's savior, which would soon fade away when it became clear that, aside from his title, Harry Potter was just another wizard. Yvonne grumbled to herself, but when she glanced at Dumbledore, who was smiling at Harry, she realized that Prefect Slytherin was right to be worried. After all, the headmaster was helping the one cheat. Percy Weasley, the Gryffindor prefect, stepped forward to shake Harry's hand almost as soon as he stepped down from the stage, and most of the room was vacated, as if he wanted to have a good chat with the one. Even George and Fred joined in the fun, leaving Ivan alone. Ivan did not join in the fun, enjoying the feast as if it were none of his business. It was often said that the food of the rotten country was authentic dirt, but the food at Hogwarts was surprisingly good. Ivan thought it might have something to do with the fact that the food at Hogwarts was made by house elves, not British wizards. Ivan had a vague feeling that he was being watched, and looked up to see Dumbledore staring at him with those silver-blue eyes. Ivan did not show any signs of stage fright. He smiled at Dumbledore, pretending to be obedient and shy, then put a large piece of cake into his mouth and swallowed it. Perhaps because of Ivan the Eater's aura, or perhaps because Dumbledore simply smiled in return, the greatest of the white wizards turned his attention elsewhere. After the sorting ceremony, there was plenty of time for the young wizards to eat, and Ivan ate until he could eat no more. All of a sudden, the food disappeared, just as it had suddenly appeared. Magical magic was nothing new to young wizards and witches who had seen it many times before, but it was new to Ivan, who was seeing it for the first time. Dumbledore slowly rose to his feet, and all eyes were on the stage as Dumbledore moved.
Now that we've both had enough to eat, I'll say a few more words. I'm going to put out a few school notices.
Dumbledore's voice echoed through the hall, as his eyes swept over the new students and then back to the Weasleys.
A special note to all new students. That area of forest on the grounds of the school is off-limits to all students. I think the older students should keep that in mind as well. Our caretaker, Mr. Filch, asked me to remind you that you are not allowed to use magic in the corridor during lessons. The Quidditch player quiz will be held in the second week.
After a brief emphasis on the rules of each term, Dumbledore paused briefly before raising his voice again.
Lastly, I must warn you that those who do not wish to die tragically will not go to the fourth-floor corridor on your right until this year.
Chapter 4, Hello Hogwarts. At the end of the term, Dumbledore seemed to revert to his usual, off-kilter, genial self, wearing a crooked wizard's hat.
Let us sing the school song together before we go to bed.
As soon as Dumbledore finished speaking, Ivan could see the expressions on the faces of the professors on the stage change, and several of the older students seemed to have constipation. Dumbledore, on the other hand, was waving his wand, and a long golden ribbon floated out of it and formed words. Like a conductor's baton, the entire school sang the Hogwarts anthem at Dumbledore's direction.
Hogwarts, 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 please teach us that our heads can be stuffed full of new and interesting things, whether they're old or bald, or if they're just boys with stupid legs.
All kinds of versions and tunes were put together, and the Weasley brothers, who were trying their best to lead everyone astray, took advantage of the chaos and sang a few lines. After singing, they were surprised to find that the mixed tone.
What's the password? Dragon scum.
Percy replied. The fat woman nodded and moved aside, revealing a circular hole in the wall that Ivan knew was the Gryffindor common room. It was only after entering that Ivan realized it was much larger than he had imagined. The flag of the Gryffindor Red Lion was suspended in midair, and several long tables were arranged neatly in the large lounge. Comfortable wing chairs were placed under the tables, and a dark brown fireplace was placed against the left wall. The flames of the fireplace illuminated the room and dispelled the chill of the night. The Gryffindor dormitories were made up of 5 people per room, with 5 four-poster beds in the spacious room, and their luggage placed under the beds, neatly stacked to the side. Due to the lack of memories, Ivan could not even recognize his own suitcase and bed. As Ivan waited for his roommates to get to the bed first, a grayish-white owl suddenly flew over the top of the west railing and perched on his shoulder, pecking him affectionately on the cheek.
Macca.
Ivan asked, the name popping into his head. Cuckoo, the grayish-white owl responded.
Whether it is or not, I'll call you Marca from now on.
Ivan reached out and tickled the owl's neck, causing Marca to squint in pleasure. With Marca's directions, Ivan was soon able to confirm that the bed on the west side next to the wall was his own. There was very little around, apart from bedding, pillows, clothes, and other daily necessities, as well as a few textbooks to carry. It is worth noting that Ivan found a small sign next to his bed, which was lovingly engraved with the name Ivan Hales. The other beds had similar signs on them, but Ivan hadn't noticed. Ivan had not been alone in the room for long when the door opened, followed by a familiar voice.
I didn't think the sorting would be anything more than a hat. I thought we were going to have to fight trolls hand to hand. I knew I shouldn't have believed George's nonsense.
The one who pushed the door open was a young wizard with fiery red hair and freckles across his nose. He was talking nonstop, and the boy behind him was thin and bespectacled. Harry yawned. Ivan was more or less surprised, and then he thought of something. There were not many new students at Hogwarts every year, and he was at Gryffindor House, so of course he was in the same dormitory as Harry.
Hello, I'm Ivan Hales.
Ivan greeted them as he approached.
Hey, I'm Ron Weasley.
Ron had only just noticed Ivan's presence.
Hello, I'm Harry Potter.
Harry extended his hand. Ivan shook hands with Harry, then looked at Ron and smiled.
Your brothers George and Fred told me about you at the meeting. Oh damn, I don't believe they're going to say anything nice about me.
Chapter 5, Are We Still Letting Ordinary Sorcerers Live? The 3-man team finally stepped into the classroom before class started.
I'll bet those stairs are deliberately targeting us, trying to make us late.
Ron rubbed his nose, which was still red, and was the first to step into the classroom. He was relieved to see that the podium was empty.
Looks like we're not too late. The professor isn't even here yet.
Harry glanced at Ivan with relief. It was a good thing he was up early, or he would have been late.
No, I think the professor has arrived.
Ivan ignored their exchange, glancing at the tabby cat on the dais before quickly returning to his seat. Harry and Ron, on the other hand, were confused. But when they sat down, they saw the tabby cat on the podium suddenly leap off the stage and twist its body. When it landed, it was a middle-aged witch. It was Professor McGonagall. Harry and Ron were instantly stunned. Only now did they understand what Ivan had just said. They just didn't understand how Ivan knew that the cat had been transformed by Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall was equally surprised. She had assumed the form of an animagus to observe the situation of the young wizards. She had also used the animagus's transformation as the beginning of the transfiguration class. She had not expected a cadet to recognize her. With a slightly approving nod at Ivan, Professor McGonagall began the first lesson in shapeshifting.
Before we start the lesson, I'd like to remind you.
Professor McGonagall waved her staff and turned the lectern in front of her into a pig. She turned it back into the lectern as many minor wizards exclaimed. Ivan sat near the front and took in the entire transformation. Accurate, fast, flawless.
Ivan Harles. Mr. Hales.
His stern and high-pitched voice echoed in the closed classroom, attracting the attention of the young wizards in the front and back rows. It was only when Professor McGonagall suddenly turned her head away that the young wizards turned back resentfully. They waved their staffs at the matches in front of them in distress or conflict, trying to make even the slightest change.
Mr. Hales, I believe I warned you before that the release of a spell is extremely dangerous. You should stay focused before you cast it. Besides, repeating mechanical exercises won't help much. I think you should be more attentive, focused, and try to picture the silver needles.
Ivan Harles nodded politely, concentrating under the witch's gaze, the wand on its nearly 12-inch length waving in the air with wonderful frequency. On the black and gray wooden table, as if driven by some force out of nowhere, a match began to twist and deform, slowly changing form under the influence of magic.
Looks like it's not that easy to accumulate proficiency.
Chapter 5, Part 2, Are We Still Letting Ordinary Sorcerers Live? After trying for most of the lesson, Ivan had long lost his earlier excitement. This was because the increase in proficiency had slowed down after the initial surge. Moreover, it was not possible to increase proficiency every time. After a period of fumbling, Ivan felt that rather than saying that he was practicing to increase the proficiency of his skills, it was better to say that he was displaying the level he had in the way of proficiency. After most of the class, Ivan could not even stabilize the transformation spell for a long time. Ivan Hales was halfway through his shape-shifting class when someone poked him a few times with a finger. Ivan turned to find an excited Harry pointing at the pointed, vaguely shiny, unidentified objects at the two ends of the table in front of him.
Hey, Ivan.
Ivan nodded at the unidentified items on the table. The fact that the first transfiguration class of the semester was able to make the match undergo obvious changes and fix the form for a long time was already at the upper level of the junior wizards. At the very least, it was much better than him.
Right? Well, neither did I, mind you. My uncle and the others are muggles. I always wondered if I could cast a spell before I started school.
With Ivan's approval, Harry poured out his earlier concerns and worries. Before he'd entered the magic world, Harry had been no more than an ordinary 11-year-old boy. Suddenly, he'd become the savior of the world. Although he'd received unimaginable attention and glory, he'd also endured unimaginable pressure. Harry had even thought about the embarrassing scene of him not being able to learn magic. Fortunately, the situation hadn't gotten this bad. Ivan, on the other hand, was not surprised that Harry had learned magic so quickly. After all, the Sorting Hat had made it very clear when they assigned the academy that he was brave, kind, and extremely talented. The Divisional Hat had even suggested that Harry enter Slytherin Academy at one point. In the 3rd grade, he had even used the Call God Guard, which he had just learned, to eliminate or drive away hundreds of Dementors. If he hadn't been so happy with his free education at Hogwarts, the gifted savior before graduation would probably have had the strength of a professor at the very least. Regarding this, Ivan expressed that he was not envious.
Very good, Miss Granger. Everyone can see that Miss Granger has succeeded in turning the match into a silver needle. 5 points to Gryffindor.
In the aisle a few steps from Ivan's seat, Professor McGonagall was holding a silver needle high and gesturing to the junior wizards around her. Miss Granger, on the other hand, was sitting upright, her dusty brown hair straggling untidily over her shoulders. She was proudly raising her little head to receive the surprised or unexpected stares of the young wizards around her. Ivan stared blankly at the silver needle. His newly adjusted mentality exploded again in an instant.
Damn it, I was so close. If I'd practiced a little longer, Professor McGonagall would have praised me by now.
Chapter 5, Part 3. Are we still letting ordinary sorcerers live? Ding, after the host's tireless efforts, Transfiguration class has ended. Please continue to work hard. Overall evaluation, average. Reviewer, Minerva McGonagall. Reward 5 GPA. Ivan hadn't expected this information to pop into his head.
You get a reward for teaching.
Ivan was a little surprised, especially when he saw the words,
Score points.
and complained about it. It seemed that it was up to the professors to judge. Could it be that there were rewards and punishments for those who did well or poorly in the final exam? Of course, Ivan was happy to discover another feature of the system, but he wondered what it could be used for. After triggering the system panel, Ivan took notice of GPA. Perhaps due to the lack of prior access, the function was never activated. It did not take long for Ivan to find a new exchange option on his panel. To Ivan's slight disappointment, there was only one copy of the Academic Genius Experience card, which cost 100 GPA. Ivan didn't have any of the powerful spells or hexes that he had imagined. Was this the rhythm of learning to the end? Yvonne glanced at the 5 GPA she had earned for one lesson and suddenly despaired, as Hogwarts only had 3 to 5 lessons a day. Based on 5 GPA per class, wouldn't it take 5 days to exchange for an hour's worth of Academic Genius Experience cards? Wasn't that a bit much? What could he learn in an hour? However, at this point, there was nothing Ivan could do about it, and there was nothing he could do to improve on this inefficient learning efficiency other than to exchange it. What else could it be? Study hard. Chapter 6, Library.
Ivan, how about we go back to the dormitory and play some wizard chess after dinner?
Ron asked Ivan in a slurred voice as he munched on a chicken leg in the lounge after his last lesson on Wednesday afternoon. Ivan slowly put the last piece of steak into his mouth. After a moment's thought, he shook his head and refused.
No, I have to go to the library later. Go play with Harry. Harry's game stinks. It's not challenging at all.
Ron shook his head in disappointment at first, then dropped the drumstick as if he'd suddenly become aware of Ivan's words.
My God, the library. I thought only one person in the entire grade went there.
Hermione,
Yvonne thought for a moment.
the only young wizard who comes into the library every day just days after school starts, must be our Miss Know-It-All.
Yeah, who else?
Ron said in an exaggerated tone. Beside him, Harry suddenly tugged on Ron's shoulder, and Ron realized that Hermione, with her arms full of books, was also in the lounge. Only then did he lower his voice and tell everyone how much Hermione liked to preach and be condescending. Fortunately, perhaps because of the distance, Hermione didn't move. She probably hadn't heard Ron. Harry, too, stood awkwardly listening. He didn't like the idea of bad-mouthing people behind their backs, but the other young wizards were interested. It had to be said that in just a few days of school, Miss Granger had become famous in the gossip circle of the young wizards with her preaching personality. Ivan was not involved in the discussion of Hermione, but he was not surprised by the situation. After all, they were all 11 or 12 years old wizards. No one liked to be lectured to their face, especially by a young wizard of the same age.
What were you doing in the library, Ivan?
Harry asked curiously. Was it that the brothers weren't having fun?
Don't you think it's getting harder and harder for the professors to assign homework? What will we do at the end of term if we don't work hard now?
Ivan glanced at Harry for a long moment before sighing. Ivan knew that his talent was mediocre, coupled with the disadvantage of his wand compatibility. Among the junior wizards in the first grade, his spellcasting skills were basically below average. Under such circumstances, the only way to improve the evaluation of the professors was to work hard on the knowledge level. If he increased his knowledge reserves and answered questions normally, he might even get an impression or something. Ivan finished eating, gathered his things, and said to Ron.
Ron, do you want to come?
Although Ron's magical talent was slightly better than his, it was above average at best. Compared to Harry, the gap was still obvious. In addition, Ron himself did not work very hard, so he would be the weakest in the iron triangle in the future. So, in the interests of goodwill, Ivan reminded him anyway. Although Ivan hadn't really expected Ron to agree.
Are you kidding? We've only been here a couple of days and we're still a long way from the end of term. What's the rush? Forget it.
Ivan didn't care and walked straight to the library.
Watch this, Ivan'll be back in an hour at the most, or I'll eat the board.
Ron muttered a betting curse. The library at Hogwarts had the most number of complete books on magic in all of England, or even all of Europe. It had everything from ordinary teaching books to esoteric forbidden spells and black magic. Ivan, who was visiting the library for the first time, was also stunned by the sea of books. Rows of shelves were tightly connected, and each shelf contained as many as 1,000 books on magic. It was far more spectacular than the movies Ivan had seen in his previous life. Perhaps it was because school had just started, but there were not many young wizards in the library. They leaned against the bookshelves or long corridors in 2s and 3s, leaving a lot of space in the resting area in the middle. Ding, exploring the library.
Are you looking for any books, child?
Asked Mrs. Alma Pins, the librarian, as she approached him.
Yes, ma'am. May I ask where the books related to the transfiguration spell are, preferably the more basic ones?
Ivan looked away from the forbidden section and turned to Mrs. Pins.
Come with me.
Mrs. Pins directed Ivan to a bookshelf. She took a copy of the primary transfiguration guide from the shelf and handed it to Ivan. Then she paused before continuing.
You were looking at a restricted section. Unless you can get authorization from the professors, no reading or borrowing of relevant books is allowed.
I was curious, that's all. I wasn't planning on actually going in.
Chapter 7, I suddenly became stupid. The quiet environment made Ivan extremely grateful to the caretaker, Madame Pince, for the library's prohibition of loud noises. As the basis of the transfiguration charm, the beginner's guide to transfiguration was not particularly difficult, although it was clear that the thick pages could not be read in a short period of time. An hour passed in the blink of an eye, and Ivan's hand was only a little more than a third of the way through the pages. After a moment's consideration, Ivan went back to reading, and another hour and a half passed by the time he had finished. After reading for more than 2 hours, Ivan's head was spinning by the time he put the book down. These ancient books of magic often included strange, unintelligible words, which seemed to reveal the mystery of magic, much to Ivan's discomfort.
Perhaps this is what it means to be a wizard.
Ivan muttered to himself, thinking that perhaps this rather metaphysical way of thinking was the true talent of a wizard. He couldn't understand it anyway. Ding, after a period of serious reading, you find the beginner's guide to transfiguration boring, hard to understand, and the proficiency of the transfiguration charm has increased slightly. Note beginner's guide to transfiguration reading, 27%. The system prompt that sounded in Ivan's mind surprised him again, as it did not trigger when he read it in class. Did he have to finish it? Ivan was suddenly aware of the difference. He had never read any of the books before, so this was the difference. With this idea in mind, Ivan turned his attention to the system's prompt that sounded no different from a game log. Yvonne felt that although there were some things she didn't understand after reading the book, they weren't exactly boring or incomprehensible. Ivan could understand the 27% reading. Anyone who had read a book would know that just because one had finished reading a book did not mean that one would be able to memorize all the knowledge in the book and apply it freely. Otherwise, wouldn't everyone be able to score full marks in exams?
Now let's see how good the so-called academic genius card is.
Chapter 8, Everyone has their own way of learning. During the course of the experiment, Ivan also noticed a hidden factor, which was that the accumulation of knowledge would also affect the efficiency and speed of learning. This was why it only took 20 minutes to finish a copy of the beginner's transfiguration guide, while it took much longer to finish the book. The quick reading of Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration was partly due to Ivan's knowledge of the basics of how to cast a transfiguration charm, and partly because he had read the book earlier and gained an understanding of its contents. The book, on the other hand, involved a wide range of knowledge, and Ivan had not read it in advance, so his reading speed was relatively slow. After understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the academic genius card, Ivan immediately realized that the best way to make good use of this hour was to read the corresponding books first, then use the academic genius card to improve his comprehension and thinking skills. Moreover, every time one understood a magic book, they would be rewarded with GPA. In addition, by increasing the level of the spell, the accumulated GPA could be used to exchange for an academic genius experience card. With this cycle, wouldn't one's strength improve by leaps and bounds? Ivan had only finished reading half of the book, and all of his charms had improved significantly. The levitation and disarming charms had been upgraded to level 1, just like the transfiguration charms, and he was rewarded with another 10 achievement points. This allowed Ivan to gain another 20 points from his original 0, greatly reducing the time it would take for him to gather more points. With this in mind, Ivan looked around the library and saw a sea of wizarding books, and suddenly realized.
Children, learning is important, but you have to balance work and rest. As for now.
Madame Pince shooed away the young wizards who were planning to stay in the library. As a librarian at Hogwarts, she certainly did not dislike young wizards who were interested in knowledge, as long as they did not cause a scene in the library. However, there was a rule regarding the library's opening hours, and Madame Pince could not extend them. Ivan stepped forward at that moment, holding up a copy of the book he had been reading.
Madam, may I borrow this book?
Of course, as long as it can be returned within the allotted time.
Madame Pince glanced at it, read the title, and nodded casually. With that, Mrs. Pince turned her head and searched the library. There were always a few people who liked to hide themselves in a sea of books in an attempt to sneak into the restricted section after lights out. Of course, there were those who lost track of time.
Thank you.
Ivan nodded politely and left the library with the book. He could not wait to go back and try out the improved spells.
Excuse me.
Ivan hadn't taken more than a few steps when he heard the crisp sound of a woman's voice behind him. He felt as if someone had slammed into him and his forehead collided with the wall. He fell on his butt, and the copy of the book he was holding fell to the floor. Fortunately, the impact was not too strong, and Ivan managed to get to his feet after rubbing his red forehead. Ivan picked up the book before he noticed the little girl who had accidentally bumped into him. The first thing that caught his eye was his thick brown hair, which was in such a mess that it was obvious that he did not have a master to take care of it. His standard wizarding robes were slightly oversized, and there were a few magic books scattered around him.
Hermione.
Yvonne was taken aback but quickly grasped the situation. Presumably, our Miss Know-It-All was in too much of a hurry when she was kicked out of the library by Mrs. Pince, so she ran into him from behind.
Ivan.
Hermione was hit hard, too, and was only able to get to her feet with Ivan's help.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have been a bit confused. I didn't think I'd hit you.
It's all right, just be more careful next time.
Ivan picked up the book and handed it back to Hermione, shaking his head to show that he didn't mind. However, when Hermione saw the book in Ivan's hand, she immediately started talking.
I've borrowed this book before and learned many new magical techniques.
Children, learning is important, but you have to balance work and rest. As for now.
By the way, learning requires understanding and memory, not going through the entire book.
Children, learning is important, but you have to balance work and rest. As for now.
Thanks for the warning, but I guess everyone has their own way of learning.
Yvonne said lightly, beginning to understand why Harry, Ron, and the other young wizards didn't like Hermione when she was smart. It must be said that before Halloween, Miss Granger did have an unpleasant personality.
How is that possible?
Hermione tried to continue her lecture, but was cut off by Ivan's actions.
Swift transfiguration, Tilda.
Chapter 9: The Curse of Fear. Hermione's mouth fell open in disbelief. She remembered Ivan's inability to stabilize the transfiguration charm in her transfiguration class yesterday. How had he become so powerful? Ivan did not stay long after completing the transformation, leaving Hermione standing there in a daze. Ivan was on his way back to his room with a book in his hand when he ran into Harry and Ron, who were flying wizard flags. Ron's eyes nearly fell out of his head when he saw Ivan's copy of the book, and the knight in his right hand fell to the table with a loud crash. The knight who fell from the sky had his armor smashed to pieces, and he cursed as he raised his toothpick-thick sword and struck Ron's left fingernail.
Oh, it hurts.
Ron's left hand shook violently, sending the knight flying to the side, and then he looked at his cracked fingernails and angrily smashed the cup into pieces, throwing them all into the box to be repaired. Ron then covered his thumb and spoke to Harry with a worried expression.
Harry, do you think Ivan is going to end up like Hermione?
I don't think so, do you?
Harry wasn't so sure. They both shuddered at the thought of two Hermione pointing fingers at them. Returning to the dormitory, Ivan was unaware that Harry and Ron were discussing him in the break room. Ivan's attention had long since shifted to the various changes in the system. Ivan Harles. Profession Wizard. Spells Level 1 6 out of 200, Level 1 12 out of 200, Level 1 30 out of 200, Level 1 16 out of 200, Level 1 1 out of 200.
Wingetim Leviasa. Accept your weapon, Tilda.
After a few minutes of self-amusement, Ivan was filled with a sense of accomplishment as he looked at the pillow that had been blasted to the end of the bed by the disarming charm and the boxes and stools that were floating in the air. This is the power of magic. Few people could resist the allure of this mysterious supernatural ability, not to mention Ivan, who was lying in a hospital bed reading books on magic and fantasy before he died in his previous life. Unfortunately, Ivan had not been able to successfully cast even the most basic spells in the few days since his transmigration. Now that he had cast several spells at once, he was naturally excited. Whatever Ivan saw now made him want to throw a transfiguration and levitation charm at it.
Never mind, why am I thinking about it now?
Ivan asked, rubbing his forehead. He was only a first-year wizard, and the only thing he could do with spells was cast them. There's no point in dwelling on it.
Fear descends.
Ivan said, recalling the sequence of the spells he could remember and pointing his wand at her head. A dull purple light flashed, and Marka tilted her head and looked at Ivan innocently.
It didn't work.
Yvonne asked, baffled by the lack of reaction.
Fear descends, fear descends.
Ivan cast a series of spells, enveloping Marka in purple light, but she thought he was playing with her, so she grabbed the tip of her wand with her hooked beak and pulled. Ivan reluctantly pulled his wand back, or it would have been destroyed by the Marka, and then looked at the fear curse in the system's magic pane in frustration. Logically speaking, he should be able to release the charm normally after reaching level 1. Or
Fear.
Chapter 10 Scabbers. What's wrong, Scabbers?
Fear descends.
Ivan said, pointing his wand at Scabbers' head. Screech, screech.
Oh no, Scabbers.
Ron broke down and shouted, rushing into the room and throwing himself on Neville's bed in an attempt to catch the gray-black rat that had just run past. Scabbers, however, was so frightened by Ivan's magic that he mistook Ron for the black dog in his dream, and with a whoosh, he managed to get under the bed through a crack in the side of the bed, causing Ron to struggle to find him.
Ivan, what happened here?
Harry asked Ivan, who had stopped at the table.
I'm just practicing my charms here.
Ivan shrugged, then said diffidently.
As you can see, there may have been a slight accident.
Harry looked at Ron, who had crawled under the table and was covered in rats, and decided that this was not a small surprise.
Then we may have to catch mice all night.
Fortunately, it turned out not to be as bad as Harry thought. After a while, Ivan, remembering that he was a wizard, took the opportunity to use a levitation charm on Scabbers, who was trying to hide under his book. Over the next few days, Ron sulked for a few days, and Ivan apologized profusely and bought some all-taste beans for Scabbers to eat. It is worth mentioning that Hermione, upon hearing this, openly mocked Ron for viewing a rat as more important than a friend, and the two got into an argument, which resulted in Ron nearly losing his mind. Ron became more and more concerned about Scabbers, even going so far as to bring Scabbers along with him to class. From time to time, he felt that someone was trying to harm his mouse. Ivan, on the other hand, continued his life in the classroom, the library, and the dormitories. He read all the basic books and managed to gather enough information to use the academic genius experience card once more. This caused the professor's score to be raised a notch. Other than Professor Binns, who taught history, who only gave a general review every time, Ivan was known to have scored well in every other class. This was especially true in charms and transfiguration classes, as Ivan's transfiguration and levitation charms had reached level 2. Harry and Ron were both stunned when, at one point, a board was transfigured a little faster than Hermione. However, it would not be so easy to level up again, as every level up required twice as much proficiency as the previous level. In addition to her studies, Ivan also sought the location of the Room of Requirement, which would serve as a place for future experiments on the power of spells. It was always inconvenient in the Gryffindor common room. Unfortunately, after reading the book for so many years, Yvonne could no longer remember it, except that it was on the other side of a tapestry, and she was unable to find it for several days. It was not until the following Friday, when Harry received an invitation from Hagrid, that Ivan's regular routine was finally broken. Of course, good news is bad news. The bad news was that they had to attend 2 potions classes with Slytherin this Friday.
If only we could skip it this morning. Professor Snape is the head of Slytherin. George told us to be careful.
In the corridor, Ron and Ivan talked about the gossip they had heard from their brothers while feeding Scabbers.
Surely not, Professor McGonagall is a head of house, and I've never seen her being biased.
Hermione shot back.
But I'm not the only one who thinks so.
Ron exclaimed, turning to Harry, and Ivan with disdain at Hermione's words.
You think so too, don't you? Professor Snape is very shady all the time. There are even rumors at school that Professor Snape used to be a dark wizard.
When it came to rumors, Ron made sure to keep his voice down so as not to be overheard.
Impossible. Professor Dumbledore would never allow a dark wizard into the house.
Harry shook his head. Although Harry thought Professor Snape, who taught potions, seemed to dislike him during the feasts at the beginning of the school year, he was quite good at teaching subjects. Snape can't be that bad.
I don't know if Professor Snape's needles are aimed at Gryffindor, but they are definitely aimed at us.
Ivan was starting to get frustrated. It seemed unlikely that he would be able to score top marks in Snape's class. After all, he loved her and hated her, and Ivan would not be surprised if Snape gave him a bad review after class. Harry was baffled by Ivan's stare and wondered what he meant by that.
You're saying Professor Snape hates Harry?
Hermione frowned, guessing Ivan's thoughts from the way he had looked at Harry earlier. Yvonne secretly admired Hermione's quick thinking, but knew better than to tell the truth and shook her head.
I just suspected, don't you think, that there was something about the way Professor Snape looked at Harry?
Chapter 11, Potions Lesson. Harry agreed, but he couldn't help but comment when he saw Ivan feeding Scabbers the beans.
Ivan, Scabbers is going to die if you keep feeding him.
At Harry's words, Hermione's attention was drawn to Scabbers in Ron's hand. The rat, which was originally thin and had a lot of hair, had changed. When Scabbers' dorm room was covered in dust, Ron used a brush to clean him up, and Scabbers had gained a lot of weight after being fed for the past few days.
How can that be? This amount of food is normal. Scabbers used to be so hungry that he lost weight. He should eat more.
Ivan insisted and placed another piece of all-taste beans in front of Scabbers' mouth.
Besides, it's an apology.
Yvonne added. Scabbers, on the other hand, did not appreciate this at all. He glared at Ivan and arrogantly pushed his hand away. It was only when Scabbers realized that his little paw was no match for Ivan's strength that he bit into the succulent bean. After all, it was already at the tip of her tongue. No matter how angry she was, she had to eat, right? I can't resist anyway.
What if they get too fat?
Ron asked, looking worried at Ivan's.
Special care.
It's all right, Scabbers doesn't have to deliver letters, and gaining weight saves him from running around.
Ivan assured her. If not for Peter Pettigrew, Ivan thought, Voldemort's plan would not have worked so easily. Ivan wanted to see if Scabbers could still run when Crookshanks and Sirius came after him. They chatted as they walked towards the basement where potions was. By the time they entered the classroom, Harry and Ron were more convinced that Snape was a dark wizard. The classroom was not large, but the atmosphere was eerie and eerie. There were glass bottles around the classroom that were filled with a greenish-blue liquid. Given that the classroom was built underground, Ivan would have thought it was some dark wizard's secret laboratory if he hadn't known it was Hogwarts.
Get to your seats, we need to be careful with this class.
Ron said. Ron, no longer suspicious of George's earlier words, pulled Ivan, Harry, and Hermione to their seats so as not to give Snape a reason to deduct points. Ivan, however, knew in his heart that even if they stayed put throughout the lesson, Snape would find a reason to pick a fight. Bang! When the young wizards of the two houses were seated, the gloomy door was suddenly flung open, and the sound of the door hitting the wall echoed throughout the classroom. A short time later, a thin figure with sallow skin under a long black cloak entered through the front door, his cold eyes sweeping over the young wizards and witches until they met Harry's eyes. Snape walked all the way to the front of the classroom, waving his wand in his right hand and causing the curtains to close automatically. Without the sunlight shining through the windows into the basement, the classroom immediately became much darker. As the light faded, Ivan became aware that Snape's tense expression had relaxed slightly. When he was done, the potions master held up the roll call book and looked around at the wizards who had been subdued by his aura.
I'm going to make a name for myself. I hope no one dares to try and disappear in my class.
Snape's deep voice began to echo throughout the classroom, and the usually mischievous young wizards fell silent. Only Draco Malfoy of Slytherin was laughing.
Neville Longbottom. Ivan Harles.
When Harry's name was read, Snape's flat tone wavered.
Ah yes, I almost forgot.
Snape's face was expressionless, but there seemed to be a hint of sarcasm in his words.
There's a new celebrity at our school.
All the young wizards turned to look at Harry, and Draco and his two henchmen snickered to themselves. Harry was not used to being targeted for no reason, but unbeknownst to him, this was only the beginning. Snape turned his head away from Harry and looked at everyone.
You have come here to learn the subtlety of potion making. Since there is no foolish wand waving, many of you do not believe this is magic. I do not expect you to truly understand the beauty of potion making.
Snape paused for a moment and then spoke with an intoxicated taste.
Think of it brewing in a cauldron, the potion slowly boiling, the white smoke rising in spirals.
Snape finished a long speech and then spoke again.
Potter, what would happen if you added powdered narcissus to the juice of wormhood?
Harry looked blank. What is a narcissus? What is wormhood? Harry looked to Ron for help, who was equally confused. Hermione raised her right hand high, but Snape pretended not to see it. Ivan was further away, so he could only open his mouth and silently spit out the words.
Life-ending water.
And
Sleeping pills.
Harry was eager, but Snape's compelling gaze prevented him from looking at Ivan any further, and he was naturally unable to guess what Ivan was saying.
I don't know, Professor.
Chapter 12, Poor Scabbers. As Harry grew increasingly withdrawn under Snape's constant questioning, Ivan recalled a conjecture he had read in his previous life. Snape's questions to Harry all contained a deeper meaning. The most obvious example is the potion, asphodel, which is Latin for
My regrets will you to the grave.
wormhood, on the other hand, usually has the connotation of pain and regret. Yvonne found it hard to imagine Snape's dark, bitter face when he was confronted by Harry. Guilt at having leaked information that led to Lily's death, or affection at knowing that her lover was dead and would die with her. Ivan's eyes filled with pity as he thought of this.
Ivan Harles.
Perhaps sensing that Ivan was looking at him strangely, Snape pointed his wand at Ivan after interrogating Harry.
Now you answer these 3 questions.
Yvonne was taken aback, not expecting Snape to ask her a question. When powdered daffodil bulbs are added to the juice of wormhood, it produces the water of life and death, which is a powerful sleeping potion.
Hear that, Potter? It seems that not every young wizard is as stupid and clueless as you.
Harry stood up angrily to retort, but Snape cut him off.
Potter, 1 point is deducted from Gryffindor because of your performance.
After announcing the verdict, Snape mercilessly turned back to his lesson, while Harry was dragged along by Ron, his fair cheeks flushed with anger. Ivan, who was just about to face Snape, was baffled by the cold shoulder. He gave Harry an apologetic look before resuming his lesson. He looked forward to the moment when Snape would continue to make things difficult for him.
Oh my God, why did Dumbledore hire Snape as a professor? He almost killed Scabbers.
Ron complained as he tried to calm Scabbers down. Harry nodded in agreement, siding with Ron, who would not have tolerated being picked on so openly in his first lesson. Harry could not understand why Snape hated him so much.
Harry, if you'd read more before class, you'd be able to answer Professor Snape's questions.
Hermione said, looking at Ivan as if she had a different opinion. Like Ivan, Professor Snape knew Ivan would answer the question, so he didn't give him a hard time. Yvonne was embarrassed by Hermione's praise and would not have been able to answer Snape if she had not known the plot.
Hermione, not everyone can memorize potions in the first few days of school, and Snape's questions about Harry are not in the first-year textbooks.
Ivan said with a sigh. Hermione pursed her lips and did not argue, as she had witnessed Snape's behavior in potions today, and was merely used to being law-abiding and obeying the professor's orders, so she tried to defend Ron when he lashed out. Ron and Harry were extremely upset with Hermione for speaking up for Snape, and the three of them went on their way in a row, but Ivan managed to calm them down before they reached Hagrid's hut. "We've come to see you, Hagrid." Harry moved forward and knocked on the door, and the four of them heard dogs barking and running inside the house. Not long after, the front door opened and a huge figure emerged.
Harry, you're here, come on in.
Chapter 13, The Secret Hidden in the Restricted Section.
Come, sit anywhere you like. There's no need to be so restrained.
Hagrid placed a plate of rock cakes on the table, then took the lead and sat down in a chair. The wooden supports creaked, causing Ivan and the others to worry. Fortunately, the chair was of good quality, and it was still stubbornly supporting the weight it should not have been carrying.
Hagrid, this is Ron and Hermione.
Harry introduced everyone to Hagrid, but Ivan stood up before he could.
Hello, Hagrid, I'm Ivan, nice to meet you. Oh, me too.
Hagrid shook Ivan's hand, but the difference in size made the handshake seem comical. The dog fangs were all over Ron, sometimes leaping on him and causing him to drool. Ron had already hidden Scabbers in his pocket the moment Fang lunged at him, and although he had never heard of a dog eating a mouse, his recent experiences had made him paranoid. It was as if someone had plotted to murder his mouse. In his first potions class, which made Ivan unable to curse. Of course, it would have been better if Snape had come up with more questions.
A Gringotts Bank break-in?
Asked Ivan, intrigued by a piece of newspaper next to the teapot. Harry and Ron, who had been chatting, stopped and leaned over to read the newspaper. It read that on the night of 31 July, there was a major robbery at Gringotts, which was believed to have been committed by some dark witch or dark wizard, and that the goblins of Gringotts insisted that nothing was missing.
It happened on the 31st of July.
Harry exclaimed, as if remembering something.
Hagrid, as I recall, it was my birthday and we were there. Is that so?
Hagrid mumbled, his eyes avoiding Harry's. He then changed the subject to rock cakes, inviting everyone to eat more. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were nearly broken their teeth by the brick-like rock cakes, but decided not to throw them away when they saw Hagrid's eager face. Ivan secretly soaked a rock biscuit in his tea in an attempt to soften it up, and managed to eat half of it. When they got back, Hagrid was as enthusiastic as ever, stuffing baskets of rock cakes into everyone's pockets, even though they didn't want them.
Split up,
Said Ivan as he warmed up a little and waved his wand to practice the charm he had learned. The beam of white light hit the dummy and it exploded, sending splinters of wood flying through the air. Ivan cast a regeneration charm to restore it. For the next half hour, the room was lit up with various colored lights. Transfiguration, petrification, flight, illumination.
I've become stupid and strong.
Chapter 14, Frequent Flying Lesson Part 1. Exploration missions that reach a certain number have additional rewards. Ivan was curious. The reward was not given out directly, but had to be found in the restricted section in the middle of the night, a process that always gave Ivan the creeps. However, since it was a reward, Ivan decided to go. After all, he had seen the ghost before. What was there to be afraid of at night? In the hall, Harry and Ron were eating lunch at the round table. When they saw Ivan, they quickly greeted him.
Ivan, over here. Where have you been all morning? Why are you in such a mess?
Harry asked, curious about Ivan's apparent collapse.
I'm just looking for a place to practice my charms.
Ivan rolled his eyes and stuffed a piece of roasted sausage into his mouth with his knife. He had used up most of the morning and hadn't eaten anything. It was the first time in many days that Ivan had expended so much of his magic, and he still felt dizzy. Ivan ate heartily in the Great Hall, while Harry and Ron discussed flying techniques excitedly. Ivan, on the other hand, was slightly intrigued when he remembered that he had a flying lesson that afternoon. After all, flying was almost everyone's dream, and having to ride a broomstick did not detract from it. The Slytherin house was even more crowded, with Draco Malfoy loudly boasting about his previous practice of flying, surrounded by the crowd.
I've been riding a broomstick since before I was on Hogwarts, and my dad flew me all the way home and once hit a muggle plane, which I would have knocked off if I hadn't dodged,
Said Draco triumphantly. Ivan had just taken a mouthful of goat's milk and nearly vomited it in public. Hit a plane, if that's so awesome, why don't you go to heaven? Flying so high with a broomstick, without any protection, would have frozen to death.
Ivan, have you ever ridden on a broomstick before?
Harry, who had been annoyed by Draco's boasting for some time now, asked Ivan, seeing his reaction.
No.
Ivan shook his head decisively. Even if he had learned it before, he had forgotten now.
What about you, Ron?
Harry asked hopefully. Ron didn't let Harry down and talked about practicing with Charlie's old broom at home. Ivan watched quietly as Ron and Draco bragged about how they were all going to have to show their true colors in flying class.
Get up.
Ivan shouted and summoned his broom, just as Madame Hooch had demonstrated, but the broom just stayed on the ground and spun lazily, showing no intention of getting up. Ivan was so anxious that he regretted not reading more books on flying to get more proficiency. It wasn't until Madame Hooch turned her head around that Ivan had the opportunity to hook his foot around the broom and gently kick it into his hand, becoming the third student to receive the broom. Madame Hooch nodded appreciatively at Ivan's steady grip on the broom and proceeded to instruct the other students. Harry, on the other hand, was stunned by Ivan's antics. Ivan placed his hand in front of his mouth and gestured for Harry to keep quiet. It's easy to ride a broomstick when you have a credit point.
All of you look at me, I'll only demonstrate once.
Madame Hooch saw that everyone was holding their brooms firmly in their hands, so she walked to the front and demonstrated the correct riding posture.
Hold on, when I blow the whistle, push off the ground. Remember to hold on to your brooms and try to get to a height of a few feet.
Madame Hooch shouted instructions to the group, and Ivan duly mounted his broomstick and prepared to experience his first high-altitude flight. However, before Ivan could try, Neville, who was standing nearby, flew high into the air with a whoosh and screamed in pain.
Ah, Matilda.
Neville was sent flying at least 20 feet into the air, causing chaos among the wizards below, and Ivan, remembering that Neville looked like he was going to fall, managed to get his wand out first.
Wingardium Leviosa.
Ivan flung a levitation charm at Neville, who was falling rapidly from midair. The force of the spell instantly stopped Neville's fall, and he was suspended 3 feet in the air. Madame Hooch's high-strung heart relaxed. God only knew how worried she was. If Neville had a problem with her flying lessons, Madame Hooch would be ashamed to remain at Hogwarts.
Well done, Gryffindor, 5 points more.
Madame Hooch gave Ivan an appreciative look. At the same time, Ivan received a prompt for his GPA to increase. The Gryffindors, led by Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and the others, applauded. However, before they could do more than clap their hands, Neville fell from midair. It was very awkward.
I'm sorry, Madam Hooch, but I seem to have run out of magic.
Chapter 14 Part 2, Frequent Flying Lesson Part 2. Madam Hooch did not blame Ivan, but hurried over to Neville to check on his injuries.
Is Neville all right, Madam Hooch?
Yvonne asked. Yvonne thought she might have cushioned the blow, but it wouldn't have caused more damage, would it?
Not too bad, just a few scratches.
Madam Hooch examined Neville and helped him up. She was so frightened by Neville's sudden descent that she insisted on taking him to the infirmary, even though he was not seriously injured.
All right, children, I'm going to take Neville to the hospital, and I want you to stay put until we get back. Nobody is allowed to fly.
Madam Hooch then led Neville into the castle, tears still streaming down his face. When they were out of earshot, the Slytherin students laughed and Draco Malfoy laughed.
Did you guys see that? The way that big, stupid slug fell out of the sky. I bet he'll never ride a broom again. That's enough, Malfoy.
Harry shouted at Malfoy to shut up. Malfoy, however, showed no sign of repentance, and instead taunted him, saying,
My God, our Potter is a friend of that blockhead. Of course we're friends, and don't you dare call Neville that.
Harry snapped at Malfoy. Yvonne frowned at this, but she knew Malfoy was a brat when they saw him in the movies. Ivan was thinking about this when he heard Malfoy pointing at him.
A friend who, like him, threw stupid people out of the sky after they'd scored.
Ivan's mouth twitched and he stepped forward, rolled up his sleeve and punched Malfoy in the face, knocking him to the ground. MMP, naughty boys really are the worst.
How dare you hit me? I'm going to make my father fire you.
Malfoy cursed as he rubbed his red and swollen cheeks. Ivan didn't mind Malfoy's threat. Malfoy was a member of the Hogwarts Board of Directors, but he didn't have the authority to expel a student, and Dumbledore wasn't about to dismiss him for something so trivial.
Ivan, nice job.
Ron stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves as he had long disliked Malfoy.
That's enough, Yvonne. Ron, what would Madam Hooch think if she came back and saw you fighting? You'd be fired.
Hermione looked at Yvonne and the others with anger and hysteria. Malfoy took advantage of Ivan's distraction and flew off on his broomstick. Perhaps because the advantage of being high in the air gave Malfoy some sense of security, he did not repent after being beaten up. Instead, he took out a crystal ball and raised it high.
Well, what do you think of that? That blockhead's crystal ball. Let's see where we can hide it, shall we? What about throwing it up a tree? Aren't you friends of the blockhead? Come and get it. Malfoy.
Harry flew into a rage and, despite Hermione's advice, flew off on his broomstick. Although it was Harry's first time flying on a broomstick, it was steady, and soon the two were locked in combat. Ivan, naturally, went to help, placing his broomstick between his legs and mimicking Harry's takeoff stance, hoping to experience what it was like to fly. However, the broom seemed to have a mind of its own, and no matter how much Ivan shook the top of the broom, it would not budge. Move!
Ivan, are you planning to break the school rules too?
The little witch glared at Ivan angrily.
No, I think Harry can manage on his own without me.
Yvonne took the opportunity to drop her broomstick, shrugging nonchalantly and gesturing for Hermione to look at the sky. Harry, flying on his broomstick, was like a fish in water, and was able to overpower Malfoy so quickly that Hermione wondered if he had been practicing before coming to school. However, Malfoy was not going to give up so easily. Seeing that he was no match for Harry, Malfoy threw the glass ball away.
Here, catch.
Malfoy began darkly. The glass ball was thrown far away by Malfoy's throw, and Harry followed suit, nearly crashing into the castle's tiles as he dived after it.
No, Harry, stop.
Hermione cried out in horror, and Malfoy laughed out loud, his smile freezing on his face when Harry made a beautiful dive to retrieve the glass. However, neither Malfoy nor Harry noticed the look of surprise on Professor McGonagall's face as she sat at a window in the distance. Hermione and the others who had been worried about Harry breathed a sigh of relief, and Ron pulled out his wand.
We're going to teach Malfoy a lesson. Leg stiff stop.
Ron shouted the leg-locking spell he had learned in Charms. Ron was lucky enough to use it once in class, when an experimental toad bounced on its hind legs. However, luck was not on Ron's side this time, and the pitch-black staff simply emitted a cloud of strange white smoke and did not react. Malfoy, who was flying on his broomstick, was also shocked at first and was prepared to dodge, but when he saw Ron's embarrassment, he burst out laughing. Ron's face turned red, and he was so angry that he wanted to jump into the air and stab his wand into Malfoy's stupid mouth.
It's better if I do it.
Ivan sighed helplessly when he saw Ron's exasperated expression. He had managed to get some rest, so he had no problem casting a spell or two. However, to avoid any mishaps, Ivan spoke to Hermione, who was at a loss due to all the changes.
Hermione, do you remember the incantation for the levitation charm?
Of course.
Hermione gave Ivan a strange look and nodded groggily.
Why do you ask? That's good.
Chapter 15, Frequent Flying Lesson 2.
Petrify them all.
As Ivan chanted the petrifaction charm, a grayish-white beam of light shot out of his wand towards Malfoy. In midair, Malfoy was so pleased with himself that he was caught off guard by Ivan's move and was hit squarely by the petrifaction charm. His fair skin turned a hard gray color in less than half a second, and his expression and movements were frozen in place. Malfoy, unable to move a finger, let alone control the broom beneath him, immediately fell from the sky. Malfoy was, of course, conscious despite being petrified. However, given the choice, Malfoy preferred to know nothing. Falling from a great height and watching the ground approach was, after all, a near-death experience, and Malfoy would have been blaring if he hadn't been petrified. Ivan turned to Hermione the moment he hit Malfoy with the petrifaction charm.
Hermione now.
The clever little witch saw through Ivan's plan the moment he made his move, but Hermione apparently had no time to criticize Ivan any further, and only had time to glare at him and shout.
Wingardium Leviosa.
Malfoy was horrified, imagining himself being smashed to pieces while petrified. Malfoy even imagined how Malfoy would torture Ivan, Harry, and the others to avenge his death. Just as Malfoy was beginning to think that the Malfoy family's downfall was due to his unfortunate death, the plummeting body came to an abrupt halt, leaving Malfoy dangling in midair.
Malfoy.
When Malfoy landed safely, the Slytherin house wizards immediately surrounded him. The Gryffindor house students gloated, as Malfoy's arrogant manner was annoying. The only person who resented this was Miss Granger.
Ivan, how could you use the petrifaction charm on Malfoy?
Hermione stared at Ivan in disbelief.
That's why you used the levitation charm so well. Professor Flitwick would have given you extra points for that.
Ivan said with a smile. Malfoy, of course, could not simply die from one of his petrification spells. At best, he would suffer a little, and even if Hermione's spell failed, he would still be there as insurance.
Yeah.
Hermione snapped. It can't be that bad, can it? Ivan scratched his head, thinking it would only cost him a few points, maybe a trophy wiping or a night in the Forbidden Forest. If it was the latter, Ivan thought it would be nice.
Hales, what are you doing here?
Bryce asked, frowning at his staff. The Slytherin house was very united in the face of foreign enemies, and despite Malfoy's usual high-and-mighty attitude, many young wizards and witches were willing to stand up for him. The Gryffindor's loyal young lions, not to mention Ivan's, moved to stand behind him, and both drew their wands.
I'm here to help Malfoy get rid of the petrifaction charm. As you can see, Malfoy was the one who started it.
Bryce hesitated for a moment, but then gestured for the others to move aside, and Ivan did as he said and removed the petrification charm from Malfoy. Malfoy's legs were still shaking from his recent experience, but he forced himself to get up and shout at Ivan, not wanting to lose face in front of everyone.
How dare you cast a spell on me? You're finished, Harles. Really?
Ivan said, looking at Draco Malfoy.
What if the professor found out about you stealing Neville's crystal ball and flying without permission?
Ivan advanced on Malfoy, his tone suddenly serious.
I've heard Filch's favorite pastime is to bring unruly children to his office, then chain their hands to the ceiling and do strange things with whips and sticks.
Malfoy was momentarily horrified, as it was rumored among the school's upperclassmen. He had forgotten that if it were true, Ivan, who had broken the school rules, would be treated the same. Seeing that it was working, Ivan tried again, but before he could speak, he heard Mrs. Hodge's voice behind him.
Help!
Chapter 16. Don't you, Malfoy?
Will someone please tell me what's going on here?
Mrs. Hodge demanded, looking around at the young wizards before turning her attention to Malfoy and Harry. Harry and Malfoy's faces turned white with fear, but Ivan beat them to the question.
Mrs. Hodge, as you can see, they are merely practicing their flying skills.
Malfoy looked conflicted and opened his mouth to tell her about Ivan's petrification spell, but decided against it. After all, Malfoy understood that Ivan would expose him for stealing Neville's crystal ball and provoking him. Malfoy knew very well which punishment was more severe. Malfoy reluctantly accepted the notion that he was
friendly
with Harry in order to avoid being hung up and whipped by Filch. Malfoy, however, was not going to allow Ivan the Disgusting to stay out of this.
Yes, but we're not the only ones flying around.
Malfoy raised his eyebrows threateningly at Ivan, and Mrs. Hodge turned her attention from Malfoy and Harry to Ivan.
Well, I'll admit it.
Ivan shrugged nonchalantly, while inwardly complaining about Malfoy's mischievousness in dragging people down with him. Ivan and Malfoy exchanged a sour look, but they reached a vague agreement not to reveal anything to each other.
I think I should have said that nobody's broomstick is allowed until I get back.
Mrs. Hodge was furious to hear that 3 students were flying without her permission. She had only just taken Neville to the hospital. What if there was another accident?
I'm so sorry, Professor.
Yvonne apologized politely and then quickly.
But I don't think any lesser wizard could resist the temptation to fly free on a broomstick, and who wouldn't want to be a glorified Quidditch player when they graduate. As for Malfoy and Neville, it was an accident. Fortunately, we did a good job with the levitation charm. No one was hurt.
Ivan went on and on about his love of Quidditch, and how he was just shy of declaring himself a future Quidditch champion. Mrs. Hodge's face lightened a little. As a flying professor and a fan of flying and Quidditch, she could naturally understand the desire.
Even so, you must pay the price for violating the school rules.
Though not as angry as she had been at first, Mrs. Hodge kept a straight face and tried to think of a way to punish the troublemakers, but was interrupted by Professor McGonagall.
Mrs. Hodge, can you stop for a moment? I may need to borrow Mr. Potter.
Of course.
Mrs. Hodge looked surprised but quickly nodded. Mrs. Hodge, who had not witnessed Harry's flight, thought that he had made some other mistake and was being approached by Professor McGonagall, so she briefly explained how he had been riding his broomstick in his class. Professor McGonagall merely nodded and gestured for Harry to follow her. Harry's mind was a mess, and he had no idea what was going on, so he left with Professor McGonagall. As Mrs. Hodge watched them go, she remembered that there were still people to deal with.
Ivan Malfoy, your actions will result in 5 points being deducted from your house, and classes will resume.
Ivan's face turned bitter. He didn't care about having his points deducted. In the past few days, he had earned 10 points for the school by answering questions in class. Nobody would blame him for losing 5 points. However, having to continue with the flying lesson was a pain in the neck for Ivan. He secretly prayed that the lesson would end soon, or he would be exposed. Ivan had no choice but to pretend to fly with his broom while trying to minimize his presence. However, things did not go as planned. Due to the previous incidents in the flying class, Madame Hodge did not dare to let the young wizards fly around again. Yvonne looked at the broomstick in her hand and sighed, regretting that she had not told him she was a terrible flyer. Now Malfoy had tricked him into thinking he couldn't fly. Ivan had no choice but to try. This time the broom gave him some face and flew away, swaying under his control. Despite this, Ivan was very happy to be flying for the first time, and the moment he tried to accelerate, he felt the cold wind in his ears and the roof tiles rushing past him. After a while, Ivan landed smoothly. Madame Hodge pursed her lips, obviously not very happy with Ivan's performance. After all, she had high hopes for Ivan. Ivan had to cough to cover his embarrassment.
Professor, I think this broom might be too old.
Malfoy, on the other hand, was grinning from ear to ear. He had not expected Ivan to be such a terrible flyer. No wonder he had stayed on the ground and not flown up like Harry. To his surprise, Ivan spoke up.
Don't you agree, Malfoy? Why else would you suddenly fall from your broom?
Malfoy, who was trying to hide his laughter, could no longer laugh and could only stare at Ivan with hatred.
Of course, I also thought there might be something wrong with the brooms.
Chapter 17, The Rejected Duel. The afternoon's flying lessons passed quickly, with Ivan being the first to complete them. Ivan gave Malfoy special attention, telling him to be careful when flying and not to fall out of the sky again. From a distance, Mrs. Hodge observed Ivan's performance, and her opinion of him improved. Gryffindor had always been at odds with Slytherin's young wizards and witches, and she considered Ivan's ability to set aside her prejudices about Malfoy a rarity. Malfoy, on the other hand, was furious and threatened to demonstrate a difficult flying move to prove his skill, but was stopped by Mrs. Hodge. Malfoy, after all, had a history of falling, and Mrs. Hodge was still worried that something would happen to him, so much so that she forbade Malfoy from flying off his broom again. Ding, the flying lesson has ended. Evaluation excellent. Reviewer Rolanda Hodge. Reward 10 GPA. Ivan strolled down the corridor and was relieved to see the final assessment. Even with Malfoy causing trouble, he had achieved his goal. Ron and Hermione, on the other hand, were not in a good mood, as they were worried about Harry being taken away by Professor McGonagall. Hermione, in particular, was not appeased until now. As soon as class was over, she could not help but run to Ivan and babble.
I think we should have told Professor McGonagall and Mrs. Hodge the truth. What if Harry got expelled?
Ivan stopped and looked at Hermione.
No, Professor McGonagall wouldn't go so far as to fire Harry over such a trivial matter. Perhaps she was planning to let Harry join the Quidditch team because he had a good flight.
You have to be at least in your second year to join the Quidditch team.
Hermione corrected Ivan.
There are exceptions to every rule, and not every young wizard can fly as well as Harry in his first year.
Ivan said with a smile. Hermione considered this possibility, and Ron's eyes lit up as he discussed the possibility of Harry joining the Quidditch team. By the time the trio arrived at the Great Hall to enjoy their dinner, Harry was already there. Before they even got there, he was already there, eagerly telling them about how Professor McGonagall had asked him to be her seeker. Despite Ivan's warning, the pair were still surprised, especially Ron, who was very excited.
Harry, I can't believe you're actually on the Quidditch team. You're probably the youngest seeker ever at Hogwarts. I mean, are they short-staffed? Beaters or goalkeepers or something?
Ron looked at Harry expectantly, hoping to hear some good news.
No, I heard from Wood that we've got enough people.
Harry shook his head in embarrassment, wondering why Ron was so excited about the Quidditch match, which he hadn't heard about until today.
By the way, Ivan, what was all that about today's flying lesson?
Harry asked, turning to Ivan in dismay.
Wasn't it Malfoy who took Neville's crystal ball, and then I went after him? Since when did we train with Malfoy?
When Harry was taken away by Professor McGonagall, he was so frightened that he thought he was going to be expelled from Hogwarts and sent back to his uncle's tiny cupboard. Ivan made no attempt to hide the fact that he had embarrassed Malfoy by attacking him with a petrifaction charm.
If we expose Malfoy, I'll end up in detention with him. He's had enough, hasn't he?
Ivan said, throwing up his hands. Ron also embellished the story of Malfoy's restricted flying by Ivan in the flying lesson, and Harry's gloom was swept away as he burst out laughing. Hermione was the only one who was bothered by the fact that they had broken the school rules. Seeing that Ivan and the others were chatting happily, she turned around angrily and left. Yvonne thought for a moment but decided not to try to persuade her to stay. Hermione was about to change. Of course, it was not that the rules were bad. It was just that sometimes it seemed too inflexible to allow oneself to fall completely into these rules. As in the book, Malfoy, who caused trouble during a flying lesson, gets away with it. This was, of course, Harry's bad luck, as Professor McGonagall did not give him a chance to explain, but even if Harry did explain, Professor McGonagall would most likely deduct their credits, and Malfoy would lose nothing. Malfoy, at least for now, was scared out of his wits and was confident that he would not be stirring up trouble for a while. Unfortunately, the slap in the face came sooner than Ivan expected, and before Ivan had finished eating, Malfoy arrived with Crabbe and Goyle. Malfoy returned to his arrogant self, perhaps due to the presence of his two henchmen, except for the fact that he hated Ivan with a passion.
Eating your last meal, Potter. You're going back to your muggle world tomorrow, aren't you?
Malfoy taunted loudly. Ivan and Harry did not move, but instead looked at Malfoy as if he were an idiot. Ron was thinking that Malfoy would be very amused if he told him that Harry was the Seeker. The indifference of Ivan and the others made Malfoy somewhat uneasy, but he gritted his teeth and said what he had to say.
Hales, if you have the guts, come to the trophy room tonight. I'll duel you.
However, to Malfoy's surprise, Ivan shook his head firmly.
I'm not going.
You've got to be kidding me. I'm supposed to be in the restricted section tonight to receive the system's rewards. I don't have time for a dueling game with Malfoy. Not to mention, Ivan's remaining impression was that Malfoy was planning to stand Filch up so that he could arrest him.
Are you scared, Hales?
Malfoy scoffed.
I'm not interested in dueling a loser. It's a waste of time.
Ivan said, looking askance at Malfoy as if he had no interest in a weakling.
Come back when you've learned more advanced magic.
Chapter 18, Exploring the Restricted Section. Ivan spoke again, as if he had just remembered something.
And Malfoy, you owe Hermione a thank you, don't forget that. Hales, that was your dirty sneak attack.
Malfoy pulled out his wand and pointed it at Ivan, his fair cheeks flushed.
I, Malfoy, would rather fall from the sky and die than thank a mudblood in Azkaban.
Crabbe and Goyle drew their wands at the same time, but were met with looks of surprise from the many Gryffindors, reminding them that they were at the Gryffindor table. Ivan winced at the mention of mudbloods, and Ron jumped to his feet and shouted.
Malfoy, we accept your challenge. I will teach you a lesson tonight. Very well then, tonight I shall wait.
Malfoy raised his eyebrows and left with a sinister smile.
Duel? What's a duel? Do two people stab each other with their swords?
Harry asked Malfoy after he had left.
Of course not. How could we be as stupid as those muggles?
Ron proudly stated the rules he knew.
Well,
Ron got more and more excited as he spoke, and he was more interested in a duel than in a boring classroom filled with books.
died.
Harry gulped.
Ron was exaggerating. It was a proper wizarding duel, and the best we could do was use a disarming charm or a leg-locking charm. Sometimes it's not as useful as a fist.
Ivan explained, shaking his head.
You'll be there at night, will you, Ivan?
Ron asked hopefully.
No, like I said before, I've got things to do tonight, and I don't have time for Malfoy.
Ivan shook his head. In Ivan's opinion, this silly face-to-face magical duel with one another waving their wands was stupid, not at all what he would expect from a wizard, and might as well have been a show of fencing. At least it would have been entertaining. Given Ron's and Harry's restless nature, Ivan was kind enough to warn them.
We don't even know if Malfoy will come tonight. Maybe he's trying to trick us into going over there so Filch can catch us all.
Surely not.
Ron and Harry looked at each other, thinking that Malfoy should not be so shameless, as this was a duel of honor. Seeing the looks on Harry's and Ron's faces, Yvonne knew she couldn't talk them out of it, so she sighed and gave up trying to talk them out of it. In any case, based on his memory, Harry and the others should have been able to escape with their lives tonight. Even if something did go wrong, Dumbledore would clean up the mess, and the headmaster would not allow anything to happen to his chosen savior.
Ron, are we really going to Malfoy's for a duel tonight? What if it's like Ivan says, and Malfoy doesn't come at all?
Harry asked Ron worriedly as they returned to the dormitory.
Of course we're going, it's a duel. There's no way Malfoy won't come. How humiliating would it be if he arrived and found out we didn't go?
Ron was desperately trying to cheer Harry up, since he had just agreed to go.
But without Ivan, there's only two of us. There's no way we're going to win against 3 Malfoys.
Said Harry.
We could ask Neville to join us, and there'd be 3 of us.
Ron thought this made sense, as Malfoy's 2 henchmen were a little stupid, but a lot stronger and would be at a disadvantage in a fight.
Neville?
Harry opened his mouth to speak, then swallowed the words he was about to say. Why did he suddenly feel more worried? Why don't we go alone?
Alohimora.
Ivan shouted as he used the unlocking charm to open the library's closed doors, then flipped them shut just to be on the safe side.
Fluorescent.
Chapter 19, Bloodline Origins. Ivan moved through the sea of books with his wand raised. He had no intention of stopping in the general area and headed straight for the restricted section. Advanced Transfiguration Guide.
It's just a book.
Ivan said through gritted teeth, rubbing his ears.
What the hell did you flip for?
It was some time before Ivan dared to pick it up. On the cover of the book was written the secrets of the dark arts. The feel of the cover was distinctly different from that of the other books.
It's not skin, is it?
A thought flashed through Ivan's mind, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Considering how much pain the man's head had been in, it was possible. Ivan glanced at the reward mission in the system. There was no change, indicating that it had nothing to do with the reward, so he really had accidentally dropped it. Ivan had no choice but to stuff the book back in his drawer in frustration. He was about to look for more booby traps when he suddenly noticed something different about the bookshelf. 1.
Someone used a confounding charm on this place and hid one of the cabinets.
Ivan's eyes narrowed. He had examined the bookshelf many times, so the only possibility was that someone had placed a confounding charm on it, affecting his judgment, and then, coincidentally, the scream had broken it. Even though Ivan knew what the anomaly was, he was still at a loss. Having read the fundamental principles of spells, he could tell that it was a charm to hide an object, but he knew too little magic to use it. Yvonne had to use her brain to try to remember the books she had read, and she happened to remember a spell Snape had used in the book.
A Perseum apparition.
Ivan tried to press his wand against the bookshelf and whispered the incantation for the apparition charm. The whole bookshelf began to shake slightly, and a crack appeared in the middle of the 12th row. A moment later, it expanded violently, revealing a new bookcase. The hidden bookcase looked no different from the others. It was filled with thick books. Ivan reached out and scanned each of them. When he touched the last one, the system prompt sounded truthfully. Ding, rewards issued. Ivan's mouth twitched, but he was already cursing in his head. Was this how the reward was given out? God only knew how long it would have taken him to find it if he hadn't been so lucky. This stupid system was not caring at all. Ivan's caring system of thinking about other people's needs made him sad. It was so hard being a host.
Bloodline origin.
Chapter 20, Put your axe down first, we can talk. Ivan was somewhat surprised to see the Dumbledore family among the list of recorded winners. Ivan then recalled Dumbledore's Phoenix, Fox, and the Grimward Sin, a rumor about the Dumbledore family. Whenever a member of the Dumbledore family is in desperate need of help, a phoenix will descend.
Huh, why did it stop there?
Yvonne was absorbed in the book, but the pages at the end of the book suddenly broke off, as if several pages had been forcibly torn out. Just as Ivan was wondering if this so-called reward was just some information, the system prompt sounded again. Bloodline origin has been read. Challenge mission activated. Challenge mission, defeat or kill a troll. Reward, Bloodline fusion potion recipe.
Challenge mission.
Ivan's heart skipped a beat. He had always thought that this was just a learning system. He never expected it to have a monster-giving setting. Yvonne was more curious about who had hidden the book in the restricted section, where they had placed confounding charms and concealment spells. It was Ivan who first thought of Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard of the century, who had the authority and reason to hide the bloodline origin. After all, blood fusion was an extremely dangerous thing. Therefore, the number of wizards who died was definitely dozens of times higher than those who survived. This terrifying mortality rate prevented wizards with special bloodlines from becoming the mainstream. It is also possible that James Potter, Sirius, and the others hid some important items, as it was their style. There is also Tom Marvolo Riddle, who was once at Hogwarts, or Lord Voldemort.
Look what I found. Another freshman, come on, there's another one over here. Petrify.
Ivan threw out a petrifaction charm, and the greenish-gray light hit Peeves squarely in the chest, but he was only knocked back a little, and his smile grew wider.
How lost it?
Peeves proudly circled Ivan, as if trying to keep him there. Ivan was not discouraged by the fact that ordinary magic was useless against Peeves, as ghosts were not immune to all magic. Fear descends Tilda. As Peeves made an arrogant face at Ivan, a purple light shot out from the tip of Ivan's wand and Peeves's face changed. He screamed and crashed into a distant classroom, where Ivan could hear Peeves's high-pitched screams.
No, Barrow, leave me alone. I swear I haven't done anything wrong. And Nick, put your axe down for a minute, we'll talk.
Ivan nodded in satisfaction at Peeves's reaction. He pulled up the system's magic column and found that the fear charm had risen to level 2. No wonder it worked so well. After dealing with the annoying Peeves, there was a flurry of footsteps in the distance, and Ivan remembered that Peeves had said that he had found another new student. By the time Ivan tried to escape through the new passageway, it was too late, as Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville charged out from opposite him. Harry and the others did not expect to meet Ivan there, but this was obviously not the time to talk about it. Harry was stunned for less than a second before he took the lead and pulled Ivan by the arm.
Ivan, run, there's no time to explain. Filch is right behind us.
Before Ivan could finish his sentence, Harry dragged him into another aisle, forcing him to run with Ivan. As she ran, Ivan had a vague feeling that this scene was familiar, and it was only when Harry led the way into the forbidden fourth-floor corridor that she realized something was wrong.
Come.
Harry and Neville worked together to pull in Ivan, who didn't want to come in, and Hermione shut the door behind them.
So Filch can't get in.
Harry said, relieved.
Yeah, it's just that we can't get out of here.
Ivan muttered to himself as he looked at the locked door and then down the corridor.
I'd rather go out and face Filch.
Chapter 21, Which Asshole Locked the Door? Harry was positioned at the very back of the group and was momentarily stunned by the sudden onslaught of the jaws. The stench of it hit Harry in the face, making him nauseous, and as despair spread through his body, Ivan's voice rang out in his ear.
It's full of obstacles.
The three-headed dog's head was stopped in midair by an invisible barrier, but in the next second, the barrier that Ivan had created with his magic was torn apart by another fang-like mouth. Fortunately, Harry was able to react in time and narrowly escaped death. Ron shouted,
Run!
And threw himself against the door. He tried to pull it open, but it was locked.
Who the hell locked the door?
Ron exclaimed in despair. Ivan, who had temporarily restrained the three-headed dog with a stunning spell and a petrification charm, rolled his eyes.
Didn't you lock the door yourself?
Ron panicked, suspecting that he might die there, and Hermione pushed him away, placing her wand on the lock.
Elohimoras.
Hermione violently broke the lock with the unlocking charm, and the five escaped as fast as they could, then slammed the door shut before the three-headed dog, Fluffy, could get out. Bang!
That monster's not going to crash its way out, is it?
Ron grumbled as he glanced at the door behind him.
No, the door is probably made of special material, otherwise it would be broken.
Ivan explained.
Why would Professor Dumbledore keep such a creature in his castle?
Harry was still in shock. He had never expected to encounter such a terrible creature at Hogwarts, and he had almost been eaten by it. Hermione, on the other hand, snapped a warning.
I'm sure you remember when we first started school, Dumbledore told us that we were not supposed to be here. If we hadn't broken the school rules and come out in the middle of the night, we wouldn't have stumbled into this place.
Perhaps because she had just escaped death, Hermione's tone was sharper than usual. Harry and Ron knew at once that Hermione was about to launch into another tirade, and Neville nearly burst into tears. However, instead of complaining, Hermione revealed that she had seen a trapdoor under the three-headed dog, as well as her suspicion that the dog was guarding something. However, before leaving, Hermione warned Harry and the others that whatever was down there had nothing to do with them, and that this should be something for Professor Dumbledore to consider. Hermione's attitude was a little hard to read for Harry and the others, but fortunately Hermione was unlikely to tell Professor McGonagall that they had broken school rules tonight.
I didn't expect Malfoy to be so sinister. He must have told Filch about what happened in the trophy room.
Ron was still furious when they returned to the dormitory, and he threatened to beat Malfoy up the next day.
Ivan, we should have listened to you.
Harry said sheepishly, as Ivan had mentioned the possibility earlier that afternoon.
Forget it.
Ivan waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind. After all, he didn't expect Harry and Ron to resist the temptation to stay in the dormitory.
By the way, Ivan, why was you in the corridor?
Harry asked curiously.
I'm here for you.
Chapter 22, I Can Be Naughtier. Ivan smacked his lips as he finished the book. He wondered which master was so unlucky as to be targeted by Lockhart while narrating their experiences.
Special.
Means.
The disarming charm and the obstacle charm are the next things we're going to focus on, and they're going to be one of the spells you're going to use most often in the future.
In charms, the shorter goblin, Professor Flitwick, was standing on a stool, spreading common magical knowledge to the young wizards and witches, occasionally waving his wand to demonstrate. After teaching charms for more than 10 years, Professor Flitwick's teaching experience was very rich, and it did not take long for him to stir up the young wizard's learning mood.
Okay, so who knows what the disarming charm is and what it does?
Professor Flitwick asked the students. Hermione took the lead, raising her arms high and glancing over her shoulder at Ivan, her only threat in class. However, to Hermione's surprise, Ivan stood up and addressed Professor Flitwick.
The disarming charm is an expelliarmus spell, which deprives the opponent of their wand after hitting them, and also has a certain impact force, depending on the level of the caster and the difference in magical power.
Professor Flitwick, who was standing on a stool and was about to ask Hermione a question, was caught off guard by Ivan's sudden outburst.
Well said, Gryffindor, 2 points more.
Professor Flitwick was quick to catch on, but Ivan's quick response was somewhat inappropriate, so Professor Flitwick cautioned him again.
Also, Mr. Harles, I think you'd better raise your hand the next time you answer a question. Okay, Professor.
Ivan looked at the reward in his hand and sat down, satisfied. Professor Flitwick nodded at Ivan's good-natured attitude, thinking that he was just passionate about learning.
Then there's the other problem, the barrier spell.
Ivan stood up again before Professor Flitwick could finish.
The impedimenta spell creates a magical barrier to stop a single-direction attack, with the advantage of being able to stack multiple spells at once to create a stronger defense, and the disadvantage of being unable to defend against an attack from another direction. Am I right, Professor?
Ivan smiled obediently at Professor Flitwick. Hermione's eyes widened as she stared at Ivan, and this time it was over before she could even lift her hand. The rest of the young wizards were trembling under Ivan's aura of genius. It was just answering a question. Was there a need to fight over it? It was too brutal.
Yes.
Professor Flitwick managed to say, and waved Ivan to a seat, this time without adding a point. Ivan didn't care. The system's point-scoring rules only required the professor's approval, and points were awarded depending on the difficulty of the question.
Let's move on to the next question.
Professor Flitwick cleared his throat, glanced at Ivan, then quickly changed the subject.
Never mind, I'll teach this class myself.
After learning how to answer questions in class, Ivan was able to earn GPA much more quickly, as Hermione, despite being a straight-A student and intelligent, was not as shameless as Ivan. It was just that every time she saw Ivan, her cute little face would always be angry. At first, she even reminded Ivan that it was wrong to rush into class and that they should compete fairly. Yvonne, of course, shook her head firmly. What a joke. How could you call it a snatch and grab between schoolboys? It wasn't like they were breaking Hogwarts rules. It is estimated that even the Big Four of Hogwarts did not expect anyone to be so loving in their studies. Ivan felt that even if they did, they would surely shed tears of relief in their coffins.
Darned soon, dear.
Chapter 23, Terrifying Troll. Of course, this thought only crossed Ivan's mind for a moment, and if he tried to kill himself again, Snape would probably deduct a large number of Gryffindor house points. Ivan didn't care about this, but he wasn't going to let Gryffindor house suffer for earning GPA. So for the next few days, Ivan did not do much more than pull a few tricks in private to gather the ingredients for the potion. The preparations didn't end until Halloween, and Ivan was pleased with his work. Ivan Harles. Profession Wizard. Spells Level 2, 265 out of 400. Levitation 97 out of 400. Transformation 382 out of 400. Splinter 84 out of 400. Petrification 191 out of 400. Shrinking 74 out of 200.
Ivan, why are you creating all these thorns?
At the Gryffindor table in the Great Gallery, Harry watched Ivan transform a twig he had found somewhere into a semicircular spike. The half-ring of iron thorns was hideous, but the thorns were long and thin and shone with a cold light that made Harry shiver.
We'll have a bit of fun on Halloween, of course.
Said Ivan with a smile.
Fun?
Harry and Ron looked at each other with a bad feeling.
It's a joke, I'm just practicing my charms.
Ivan explained with a wave of his hand. Ivan, however, did not stop there. He pointed his wand at the newly formed spike and used a shrinking charm to shrink it dozens of times before throwing it into the bag. There was a metallic noise from the bag, and Ivan put it away.
Where's Hermione, anyway?
Yvonne asked, looking around for Miss Know-It-All. Ron's face turned red, and he stammered for a long time without being able to say anything. In the end, it was Harry who couldn't stand it any longer and told her about how Ron had overheard Hermione gossiping about him.
I wasn't wrong, she was always like that.
Ron blushed. Yvonne frowned. She hadn't expected this to happen with him around. After a moment's thought, she stood up, picked up her wand, and headed for the exit.
Ivan, where are you going before the feast starts?
Harry asked.
To Hermione, of course.
Chapter 24, Battling the Troll and the Failing Curse of Fear.
Wingatim lev iasa.
As the troll slowly approached, Ivan whispered the incantation for the levitation charm, and a few rock cakes on the ground slowly floated up so that the troll could see them and not step on them. Ivan, however, was still a little apprehensive, fearing that the troll was not as stupid as the book claimed and would see through the trap. Ivan soon discovered that the troll was even more stupid than he had first thought. It did not even have the vigilance of a normal creature. It simply grabbed the food in front of it and shoved it into its mouth, not caring how it got there. The troll even threw its club on the ground in an attempt to grab it, making Ivan wonder if Quirrell had been secretly withholding food from the troll and keeping the gold galleons he saved in his pocket. Ivan's nervous expression relaxed after a while, and he gently touched the pocket of his wizard's robe with his left hand. It seemed that his well-prepared escape plan would not work. However, to Ivan's surprise, a few minutes later, instead of collapsing, the troll twitched its nose as if it wanted to sniff for other food. Ivan was stunned. In order to make sure the plan worked, he had used enough force to take down several adult wizards, but the troll did not react at all. This is not scientific at all. Yvonne was debating whether or not to attack when a high-pitched voice broke the awkward silence. Ivan, who was hiding in the secret passage, spotted Hermione, who had suddenly appeared at the corner of the corridor. The troll picked up the stick from the floor again and rushed towards her excitedly. Yvonne understood the moment she saw the troll move that Hermione must have been attracted by the sound of the club hitting the ground. Ivan cursed under his breath. If he had known, he would have set the trap further away. Of course, Ivan was just saying that. Any further and he wouldn't have been able to tell if a troll was coming through. Hermione, on the other hand, was thrown into a panic by the terrifying pressure of the troll's approach. Her brain was trying to send messages to her body to escape, but her legs were so weak that she could barely stand. As Yvonne had expected, Hermione, who had been crying in the bathroom, was curious to see what was going on because of the ground shaking and the loud thud of the stick hitting the floor. However, Hermione never imagined that she would see a troll in the corridors of Hogwarts. Just as Hermione thought she was going to die, a voice called out.
Fear descends.
A bright purple light shot out from the other side, and the troll's size made it almost impossible for the spell to miss. The moment the fear charm hit, the troll stopped running and stood there in a daze. Ivan, who had been hiding in the secret passage, also came out.
Ivan,
Like a drowning woman grasping at straws, Hermione threw herself at Ivan and hugged him, tears still welling in her eyes. Ivan, however, did not let his guard down. He used his free left hand to break free from Hermione's grip, and his right hand was still holding his wand, constantly increasing the power of the fear charm. Hermione blushed but soon noticed that something was wrong with the troll, as she had expected Ivan to overpower it with a charm.
What happened to it?
Chapter 25, Challenge completed.
split up.
Ivan's splinter spell hit the troll at the joint of its arm, and the troll who was swinging the club around felt its arm go numb, and the weapon flew out of its grasp, flying past Ivan's side with the added speed of its own attack, the wind pressure causing Ivan to squint and Hermione to go pale and nearly scream. Bang! With Ivan's precise calculations, the wooden club didn't do any damage to the two of them. It only landed a short distance behind Ivan with a loud crash.
Oh dear, what on earth is going on?
Professor McGonagall was the first to rush into the corridor, where she was greeted by a scene she had never expected to see. The corridor was broken and strewn with thorns, the walls were pitted and smashed, and a troll lay in front of Ivan with a large hole in its head. And Ivan and Hermione, whom she had been worried about, seemed to be in good shape. Apart from a bit of dust on their clothes, they seemed fine. Professor McGonagall almost believed that she was hallucinating when Snape arrived, unable to believe his eyes. Quirrell was even more surprised. For a moment, he forgot his disguise and ran over to the troll's body to double-check that he had indeed released the troll.
It seems that this year, in addition to being the savior of the wizarding world, we have a new genius who has just started school and is already doing something that even certain lecturers cannot do.
Snape, who was the first to react, looked at Ivan with an expressionless face, but his words were, by all accounts, full of irony. Quirrell was now back to his old subservient self, hunched over with a worried look on his face, shaking a little at Snape's words and showing no further reaction, as if the
Some professor.
Snape was referring to was not him. Professor McGonagall was furious.
Hales, can you explain to me exactly what happened here?
Despite Ivan's presence as well as Hermione's, everyone present, including Professor McGonagall, could tell that Ivan was in charge. Hermione, after all, still had tears in her eyes, and a look of terror was evident on her face.
As you can see, Professor, I just happened to come across a troll in this corridor.
Ivan said, throwing up his hands innocently.
By chance.
Professor McGonagall didn't believe him for a second. Snape looked at the iron thorns scattered on the ground and added,
I think our Mr. Harles might have wanted to be a hero for once. Otherwise, why would he have come prepared and just happened to be here?
Unable to find the time to tie up loose ends, Ivan was at a loss for words.
Ivan's here for Hermione, Professor. Will testify for him.
Harry and Ron burst out from behind an armored knight in the corridor. They had arrived a long time ago, but had arrived just in time for Ivan to show off his prowess. The two of them had little to do except hide and shout.
Holy heck.
And 666 to themselves.
Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, I thought you were supposed to be in your room right now.
Chapter 26, I'm so stupid.
Yes.
Harry swallowed hard under Professor McGonagall's gaze.
But in practice, the results are always different.
Professor McGonagall's face darkened, and Harry, sensing that something was amiss, quickly added,
It means Ron and I heard about the troll at the feast, and remembered that Yvonne and Hermione were still here, so we came because we were worried.
Ron gritted his teeth and prepared to tell Hermione about how he had spoken ill of her behind her back, causing her to cry and hide in the girls' bathroom.
That's right, they're here for me.
However, Hermione interrupted them and then turned back to McGonagall.
Professor McGonagall, I was looking for a troll and thought I could deal with it. You know, I've read about how to deal with these creatures.
Hermione seemed a little uncomfortable with lying for the first time, and her cheeks flushed, but she was soon able to talk her way out of it.
How can you think that, silly girl? You're only in your first year. How can you possibly take on a troll?
Professor McGonagall scolded her.
Ahem.
Ivan cleared his throat, reminding Professor McGonagall that there was a young first-year wizard who had successfully fought a troll. Professor McGonagall was put on the spot by Ivan's honesty, but was relieved when Filch invited Dumbledore. The moment Dumbledore appeared, his gaze was fixed on the scattered iron thorns and the dead troll, especially the spike that had pierced the troll's head.
What an excellent transfiguration charm. I doubt I've ever seen a lesser wizard of your age use it better than you. I'm sure Professor McGonagall would give Gryffindor 10 points for it in class,"
said Dumbledore, openly impressed.
Albus, we should be discussing these children's private visits to the troll.
McGonagall nodded. She was surprised at Ivan's skill with transfiguration, but this was obviously not the time.
"In that case, let's leave it at that."
Dumbledore muttered to himself for a moment before turning to the others. Miss Granger's recklessness will result in 10 points being deducted from Gryffindor House, and although Potter and Weasley have broken the rules of the school, this friendship is worthy of recognition, so there will be no punishment. Harry and Ron both breathed a sigh of relief, while Hermione bit her lip, still finding the loss of points hard to swallow.
As for Harles,
Dumbledore paused, and Hermione's heart began to pound again, but Dumbledore's tone suddenly relaxed.
because of your actions, I will give Gryffindor an extra 20 points.
Hermione's anxious heart finally relaxed completely, and she looked at Ivan with such joy that the effect of the point deduction was somewhat mitigated. Ivan's lip curled, as when Dumbledore offered to give him extra points, the system gave him 20 points at the same time.
Isn't that a bit loose?
Professor McGonagall asked, frowning at the possibility that Dumbledore was trying to encourage Ivan and the others to take risks.
Not every minor wizard is able to defeat a troll in his or her first year at Hogwarts.
Dumbledore objected, shaking his head.
By the way, Professor, I don't think I need to pay for this troll, do I?
Ivan asked casually, in a good mood.
Of course not, but
Dumbledore smiled at Ivan.
could you come to the headmaster's office later? I'm very interested in your victory over the troll. Perhaps when I'm finished here, we can talk.
Chapter 27, I don't believe you, you're a bad old man. Fawkes, who was idly combing his feathers, suddenly shivered, and his red eyes scanned the area for possible threats. When he found nothing but a harmless young wizard with little magic, he closed his eyes and rested. The harmless Ivan, however, extended his sinful right hand under the guise of closeness and convenience for future communication. The nimble fingers paused briefly in the air, and when Ivan saw that Fawkes was still fast asleep, he cautiously touched his feather with one finger. At the moment of contact, the sleeping phoenix opened its eyes and stared at Ivan for a long time. After confirming that Ivan meant no harm, Fawkes arrogantly swatted Ivan's evil hand away with his wings, his eyes full of warning. As a phoenix, it was not something that anyone could touch.
I didn't think I'd be able to pet a phoenix one day.
Yvonne said happily, touching Fawkes all over, using her parrot-playing experience from her previous life on him. Fawkes, the phoenix, also gradually changed from being impatient to indifferent, and was even willing to lift his proud head and let Ivan stroke the feathers on his neck. While petting Fawkes, Ivan studied the legendary bird of the West. Unlike the mythical phoenix that Ivan remembered from his previous life, Fawkes looked more like a large turkey with beautiful golden-red feathers, and despite his majestic appearance, Ivan somehow found himself wondering how it would taste.
Fire is the hotbed of the phoenix. Perhaps you could cook it another way.
Ivan turned to see Dumbledore's large frame entering the room. He was over 100 years old and did not seem to be hindering the greatest white wizard of the century. Fawkes, who was being cuddled by Ivan, flew into the air and angrily pecked Ivan on the head before flopping back onto Dumbledore's hat. Fawkes would never have guessed that the harmless young wizard in front of him was planning to roast him. Ivan rubbed his aching head and asked innocently,
Professor, I'm curious how you know I'm thinking about this. Can you read my memories? Sometimes one's actions and actions reveal one's thoughts.
Dumbledore said, not admitting or contradicting her. Ivan had a look of sudden understanding on his face, but in his heart he was already cursing.
Like hell I will, you're a rotten old man.
Perhaps because it was too early for the academic genius experience card, Ivan felt a force enter his brain the moment Dumbledore opened his mouth, and it did not go away until he asked. Ivan could guess with his toes that this power was Dumbledore's Dementor, but he did not know how he was able to detect such a silent and soul-related trace of magic when he was under the experiencing card. Somehow, after Dumbledore withdrew his Dementor, he did not use it again, but sat in the headmaster's chair with his long purple-blue robe trailing behind him, gesturing for Ivan to sit down as he retrieved some snacks from his drawer and placed them on the table.
Would you like a cockroach pile? How about the latest flavor, sizzle honeysuckle?
Chapter 28, Hero Hails. The Great White Wizard did not seem to find anything amiss with Ivan's speech, and when he heard that Ivan had, coincidentally, used iron thorns and a transfiguration charm to reverse the situation within 10 seconds, Dumbledore clapped his hands and clapped, his expression and tone of voice clearly impressed.
What a fight! You're better than I thought you'd be, and I think Severus was right. Hogwarts is one more genius.
Dumbledore exclaimed. A young wizard, who had only been in school for a few months, was able to remain calm and collected when facing a troll for the first time. He was also able to use what he had on hand to easily defeat the troll. He had not seen such an outstanding young wizard in decades. Ivan was uncomfortable with Dumbledore's praise, as it meant he was being targeted by the professor, which was not a good thing. The rest of the conversation became more relaxed, with none of Ivan's expected intrigue, probing, or tit-for-tat suspicions. Other than the initial attempt at dementory, Dumbledore was as affable as an old, homely neighbor. This leads Ivan to maliciously wonder if Dumbledore is suffering from dementia. However, during the course of their conversation, Dumbledore mentioned his mother, Alicia Harles, which piqued her interest.
Professor, do you know my mother?
Ivan asked, feigning curiosity.
Yes, your mother was very impressive when she attended school here.
Dumbledore winked at Ivan meaningfully.
In every way.
The fact that Dumbledore's speech was cut off in mid-sentence made Ivan's head hurt, and he wondered if this was due to a lack of information on his own, or if it was simply a matter of instant communication between intelligent people.
Well, child, you may go back. I believe there will be a surprise waiting for you.
Ivan did not hold out much hope that Dumbledore would be pleasantly surprised, and the news of his return was pleasant enough. As such, Ivan left the room in a swift and graceful fashion, Dumbledore soothing Fawkes with one hand and watching him go, lost in thought.
Dessert souffle.
In front of the Hogwarts lounge, Ivan shouted the password, and the fat lady who was in charge of guarding it nodded and stepped aside to reveal a circular passageway. Every time Ivan climbed, he couldn't help but complain about the tunnel's designer. Of all the things to design, he had to make it into a pipe. The Gryffindor lounge at midnight was pitch black. The dark brown fireplace on the right, which often burned brightly, had been extinguished at some point, and the magic lamps were not switched on. The silence was unusual. Ivan's expression did not change as he slowly moved forward, but his right hand was already slipping down to the wand at his waist. Bang! As Ivan moved to the middle of the room, a great blaze of fire erupted from the fireplace, followed by a brilliant burst of white light from the surrounding witchlights, the red lion flag representing Gryffindor on the ceiling unfurling in midair, and strings of iridescent objects floating down. The Weasleys, in their strange uniforms, rushed out of the dormitory and threw a large bundle of holiday ribbons made from torn sheets over Ivan's head, shouting behind him.
Let us welcome back the heroes of Gryffindor.
Gryffindor's hero, who, how dare he be so arrogant? Ivan, who thought it was a late-night celebration of Halloween, was stunned when the Weasleys opened their mouths, but before he could react, dozens of junior witches and wizards poured through the dormitory entrance. In the front row were Harry and Ron, who worked together to carry Ivan down, and the Weasleys, grinning wickedly as they threw Ivan high into the air.
Hooray for the return of our Gryffindor hero.
Fred shouts at the top of his voice. The Gryffindor cubs joined in the cheering.
Hails the hero. Troll killer.
Ivan was tossed around so much that he felt like his bones were about to fall apart. It took a while for the cubs to calm down. During this time, Yvonne was able to find out what had happened, and when Harry and Ron returned to the dormitory, Ron told her about Yvonne killing the troll and rescuing Hermione. Wizards who could only spend Halloween in the common room because of the troll incident had never heard such shocking news. Word spread like wildfire, and Ivan was hailed as a Gryffindor hero. As for the welcoming party, it was, of course, organized by the troublemaking Weasley brothers. After learning what had happened, Ivan was still a little confused. After all, Harry and Ron, who defeated the troll in the original book, did not receive such treatment. Ivan, however, had forgotten that he was fundamentally different from Harry and Ron, who, despite successfully stunning the troll, had been beaten to a pulp afterwards, and that their victory over the troll had not been honorable purely by luck. From the perspective of an onlooker, Ivan was a textbook example of a hero saving a damsel in distress, and his method of killing the troll was even more efficient. What's more, the troll just happened to fall in front of Ivan, and its death by being pierced through the head was legendary, which was why Ron was so impressed. Ivan could even see some of the witches in the crowd flirting with him, and some of the more daring ones even approached him to ask about the details of how he killed the troll. So attentive that Ivan almost forgot he was at Hogwarts.
This is quite a surprise.
Chapter 29, An Unexpected Letter, 2 in 1, 4,000 words.
Ivan, what you did tonight was amazing.
Harry, who had been pushed to the edge of the crowd, came forward and gave Ivan a big hug.
Perhaps.
Ivan said with a shrug, then explained.
You shouldn't have said that. I went to a lot of trouble to deal with trolls.
It is not that Ivan is humble, but that the news has been distorted, and one version of it that Ivan heard described a troll that was 12 feet tall becoming 20 feet tall. Such flattery would not do.
Hey, come on, you're Gryffindor's hero. We only saw you kill a troll after you saved Hermione. Boy, that was fast.
Ron thumped Ivan on the chest and laughed.
Besides, we only mentioned what happened. Who knew it would go down like this?
Harry said they weren't taking the blame.
Where's Hermione, by the way?
Yvonne asked.
I don't know, I just saw it.
Harry said, feeling a little strange.
You saved her life, and now she's not even thanking you.
Ron said angrily.
She must have left on an emergency.
Yvonne shook her head. Hermione was not like that. Harry and Ron accepted Ivan's explanation, as Hermione had taken all the punishment for them and changed their opinion of her. Harry and Ron then mysteriously took Ivan to see a package containing a brand new Nimbus 2000 that Professor McGonagall had sent to Harry that morning, which he had missed because it was in the library. Despite her lack of interest, Ivan saw the excitement on their faces and went against his conscience to boast about them before sending them off to bed. Ivan finally had time to take a closer look at his reward for killing the troll. Bloodline Fusion Potion, Potion Recipe. Ingredients: dried nettles, bone-picking grass, thistleweed, mistletoe berries, black reed petals, rat lee, black bat's keratin, mountain flower powder.
That's too much, isn't it?
Chapter 29, Part 2, An Unexpected Letter, 2 in 1, 4,000 words. Ivan was somewhat speechless at the thought of the fear charm. Normally, a normal mother would have taught such a dangerous dark spell before going to school. The teaching process could never have been a happy or peaceful one, or he would not have felt fear in his memories. It was clear that the mother wanted to give her child a taste of fear herself in order to speed things up. These unknowns gave Ivan a pang of anxiety, which made him desperately want to be strong enough to protect himself before he left for home. The fastest way to increase one's strength was to create this newly acquired bloodline fusion reagent. Therefore, even though Ivan felt that the 3 galleons in the letter were a little troublesome, he still kept them. He had no choice, he was so short of money.
All right, children, class starts now. Get back to your seats.
Ivan, Harry, and Ron quickly found 3 empty seats, and Hermione had no choice but to sit back down. Professor McGonagall consciously glanced at Ivan, then cleared her throat and addressed the assembled wizards.
I believe I said at the start of the school year that transfiguration would be one of the most complicated and dangerous magic you will ever learn at Hogwarts, and that it will be enough to solve most of the problems you will face.
As you may have heard, only yesterday, Mr. Hales managed to kill a troll in the corridors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with the help of a superb transfiguration charm and a brilliant brain. For this, Professor Dumbledore gave Gryffindor House 20 points.
Professor McGonagall concluded. When Professor McGonagall finished speaking, there was a great deal of discussion, and Ivan became the center of attention. Despite the fact that many lesser wizards had heard the news before, it was, after all, coming from Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, and it might not be true. Ivan was not at all pleased with the sudden compliment, as he knew from experience that it was usually followed by a
But,
which was typical for a teacher. As expected, Ivan heard Professor McGonagall continue.
but,
Professor McGonagall's gaze sharpened as she continued.
if I were to learn of another such danger, I would certainly advise Professor Dumbledore to have him expelled. And even for Hales, defeating a troll isn't as easy as you might think.
Professor McGonagall glanced around at the assembled wizards, noting that they had all fallen silent. She then turned to Ivan and gave him a look, indicating that he should perform. Ivan immediately understood and stood up. His expression was grave and his tone was deep.
Yes, Professor, I swear that a troll is the most difficult opponent I've had in 11 years.
As soon as Ivan finished speaking, there was a great deal of laughter, as many clever young wizards could hear the hidden meaning in his words. As a first-year, 11-year-old young wizard, they considered the troll to be Ivan's first and, of course, most difficult opponent. Professor McGonagall was unhappy with Ivan's patronizing attitude, and she was more inclined to let him talk about his fear of trolls and the hair-raising process that would give these restless children a heads-up. Ivan gave a noncommittal shrug, inwardly praising Professor McGonagall's subtlety. First, he used his defeat of the troll to stir up the young wizard's enthusiasm for learning transfiguration, and then gave an official speech to set the tone for the event and put an end to the increasingly exaggerated rumors. After all, it was better to let the cat out of the bag than to hide it and let everyone guess. It was better to use it as a model to promote a positive effect, using expulsion as a warning to prevent some young wizards from having the idea that
He can do it, I can do it.
Chapter 30, A Bold Idea. After this reminder, Professor McGonagall turned her attention away from Ivan and began the day's lesson, which was to transform any belongings into buttons with a transfiguration charm. Ivan's transfiguration spell had been upgraded to level 3, so it was a piece of cake for him. With a gentle wave of his wand, the quill on the table was transformed into a round button with beautiful circular patterns on it. Ivan had used the transfiguration spell to its fullest extent to score points. Professor McGonagall nodded in satisfaction and gave Ivan a reserved point. However, the other young wizards did not have the ability to do so. Being able to successfully cast the transfiguration charm was already considered quite good. Seamus Finnegan, who was sitting a short distance in front of Ivan, blew up the ink box he was using to change his appearance. Ivan even saw a young wizard secretly pulling off a button on his shirt in an attempt to pretend that he had conjured it. Unfortunately, Professor McGonagall was not old enough to be senile and was able to easily tell the difference. After witnessing Ivan's wonderful transfiguration charm, Professor McGonagall's standards were raised considerably, and she found the rest a little hard to swallow, except for the buttons that Hermione managed to produce from a ball of paper. Professor McGonagall clapped her hands to attract everyone's attention.
Everyone stop what you're doing.
McGonagall said,
Do any of you know what the key to casting this spell is? Professor, the transfiguration charm is an advanced form of magic that requires the caster to imagine in their mind what it would be like to transform.
Everyone stop what you're doing, McGonagall said. Do any of you know what the key to casting this spell is? Professor, the transfiguration charm is an advanced form of magic that requires the caster to imagine in their mind what it would be like to transform. The more similar an object is to the one that needs to be transfigured, the more likely it is that the transfiguration will succeed. In addition, transfigured creatures are much more difficult to transfigure than transfigured objects, and only a few wizards who are proficient in transfiguration spells can transfigure creatures.
Ivan Harles, I think I warned you.
Professor McGonagall was already in a conditioned reflex and instinctively wanted to berate Ivan. But when she turned around, she found that Ivan was holding his hands up in a formal manner and staring blankly into space.
Granger, how did you do that?
Professor McGonagall asked, realizing that it was Hermione Granger, who was usually so proper. At this moment, although Miss Know-it-all was so nervous that her body was trembling, she still raised her neck and said calmly,
Professor, am I right?
Of course.
Professor McGonagall was so shocked that she had to stammer for a moment before Hermione could sit down. Hermione looked slightly disappointed, but when she saw Ivan's dazed expression and raised hand, she smiled again. Ivan slowly lowered his raised hand, his mind filled with doubt, wondering if he was in a dream or if this was a fake Granger. Like Yvonne, Harry and Ron felt that something was very wrong with Hermione, so Ron couldn't wait to tease her after class.
What's the matter with Hermione? I can't believe I saw her stand up in Professor McGonagall's class today without permission. My God, I think Professor McGonagall was stunned.
Ron wanted to hear Harry and Ivan's complaints, but when nothing happened, he turned around and saw Hermione behind him.
H. Herman.
Ron said in surprise,
I'm just trying to get my house points back. Besides, it's not against Hogwarts rules. Professor McGonagall will understand.
Hermione said, glaring at Ron and then looking at Ivan.
Ivan, I heard from Ron and Harry that you only met the troll yesterday because you came looking for me, so.
Nothing, aren't we friends?
Yvonne laughed. During the fight with the troll the previous day, Ivan had blamed Hermione for disrupting his plans, but he also knew that he had made a mistake in his choice of venue.
Well,
Hermione nodded with a smile, then added,
I'll work hard to get my lost credits back as soon as possible.
This gave Ivan a headache. If Hermione worked hard, then his plan to earn student points by answering questions so that he could improve his potions would be thwarted.
I thought you only had 10 points deducted from your class by Professor Dumbledore. You must have earned them back from your previous classes.
Yvonne was puzzled. Was there a need to be so torn about 10 points? It was not much compared to the number of house points Hermione had earned by answering questions in half a term.
67 house points to be exact.
Hermione said emphatically, and the witch stared at Ivan for a long time. She would have given him more if he hadn't been so shamelessly quick to answer.
then why still?
Ivan wondered.
I thought you said you'd make it back 10 times, 100 times over.
Chapter 31, I came all this way and this is what you're letting me see. Hermione, who was planning to discuss the various uses of the transfiguration charm with Ivan, caught Ivan looking at her with increasing enthusiasm.
Ivan, what is it?
Hermione asked, feigning calm.
Come with me, I'll explain later.
To the shock of Harry and Ron, Ivan grabbed Hermione's wrist and ran. Hermione didn't even know what was happening as Ivan dragged her along, and Harry and Ron, recovering from their shock, followed suit. Along the way, Ivan's popularity attracted a large number of people to identify him, and the fact that he was holding Hermione's hand as they ran caused many wizards to gossip. Big news! After all, the news of Ivan saving Hermione from the troll last night had spread far and wide, and the sight of it made their imaginations run wild. Some of the younger witches looked disappointed, but they followed suit out of curiosity. George and Fred even whistled excitedly and gave Ivan a big thumbs up when he and Hermione passed by. As the crowd grew larger and larger, Ivan became more and more confused, and Hermione, who had been dragged along by Ivan, became aware of the stares she was receiving. Her cheeks were flushed, and her mind began to wander, although she had a vague feeling that the road was becoming more and more familiar.
It seems to be the way to the library.
As expected, the door to the library soon came into view, and Ivan, in a rare show of disregard for the tradition of silence, hurried Hermione to the sitting area, where he handed her an unfinished copy of Basic Potions and Herb Analysis, and pointed to a section.
Hermione, this book, Chapter 3, Verse 7, is about the contrast between the properties of the black blood grass and the rat lay. But why should many potions be brewed with the same ingredients?
Hermione woke up from her daze, her cheeks still flushed, and she realized that she had misunderstood. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to hide in a pile of books. When she realized that she had read the book Ivan had forced on her, she calmed down and got into character.
That's because the black blood grass's medicinal properties are too strong, so it's usually added to counteract the effects of the other herbs, but the milder rat plums have a neutralized effect.
When Hermione finished speaking, Ivan continued to flip through the pages of the book, using the excuse of learning to communicate with each other. This was the scene that greeted Harry, Ron, and the rest of the gang when they arrived.
There.
As a member of the gossip party, George wondered if he was hallucinating. God, what was wrong with the world? The others found it hard to accept as well. They came all the way here just to show them this.
I think I'll just go back to playing wizard's chess.
Ron said dazedly.
I'm sure Wood would like me to practice Quidditch now, too.
Harry nodded in agreement. They didn't want to waste their time in the library. George and the others were determined to stay and see how things were going, but the large group of people blocking the door soon attracted the attention of Madame Pince.
Silence, if you want to read in the library, be quiet or go away.
Madame Pince snapped impatiently. Seeing that Madame Pince was planning to chase them away, the young wizards dispersed in disappointment. At this moment, Ivan was so immersed in learning that he did not notice this at all. Instead, he looked at the rapidly increasing proficiency in the system column and felt extremely comfortable. As long as it was basic theoretical knowledge, regardless of subject, there was little Hermione did not already know, effectively omitting Ivan's steps of checking up on other books. This, coupled with the fact that the young witch's comprehension skills were far superior to Ivan's in his normal state, resulted in her learning becoming much more efficient. Hermione's existence was like a learning accelerator, and compared to his reading efficiency when he did not have an experience card, his proficiency had more than doubled. After a dozen pages, Hermione looked nervously up at Ivan, afraid that she had said something wrong. It could not be helped. After witnessing Ivan's easy kill of the troll and his remarkable transfiguration charm, Hermione had come to think of Ivan as far superior to her own abilities.
Why did it stop?
Yvonne, who had been listening to Hermione's explanation, suddenly stopped talking and turned her head in surprise to find Hermione looking at her nervously. Ivan thought for a moment and understood what was going on.
You were very good in there.
Ivan and Hermione spent the next few hours studying and discussing. Ivan was able to maintain a relatively equal status during the discussion, thanks to his previous half of the term and his accumulated knowledge. Before he knew it, Ivan had already reread several of the books that he had previously read but had not fully understood. His reading progress had also been pushed to 100%. Ding, reading progress of basic potion formulation and herb analysis reached 100%. Rewards, 5 achievement points. Ding.
Advanced transfiguration.
Chapter 32, A Gamble with Malfoy. In the blink of an eye, it was November and the weather was turning cold. Ivan's potions level during his daily academic discussions with Hermione was close to level 4, and it would not be long before he reached the lowest level of brewing the Bloodline fusion potion. In order to avoid the awkward situation of having his memory stolen again, Ivan took the time to sneak back into the restricted section, where he used the accumulated achievement points he had accumulated over the past few weeks to upgrade his occlumency to level 2 in just a few nights. However, before Ivan could be happy, he was once again troubled by the large amount of ingredients needed to brew the Bloodline fusion potion. He only had 3 galleons, 15 sickles, and 20 or so bronze nuts. Even if he managed to sneak into Hogsmeade through the secret passage, he would not be able to afford all the materials he needed. He also had to thank his mother, whom he had never met, for sending him a letter. Otherwise, he would not have had any galleons.
Do you guys think there's a way to make lots and lots of galleons in a month?
Ivan asked the crowd on the way to the Great Hall.
What do you say we go rob the Gringotts? You can count me in.
Ron joked.
Oh, come on, you'll be thrown into Azkaban by the goblins there before you can do anything about it.
Hermione said, rolling her eyes as she explained why Gringotts was supposedly the safest place in the wizarding world. In addition to the various defenses, it is said to be guarded by a dragon.
By the way, Ivan, what are you going to do with all these galleons?
Harry asked, suddenly curious.
I got some from the vault before I came to Hogwarts. If you don't need much, I can lend you some.
Harry then enthusiastically grabbed a dozen galleons from the pocket of his wizarding robes and placed them in front of Ivan, stating that they were not enough and that he had placed many more in the dormitory.
Forget it, I'm just saying. You can't spend as much galleons as you want here.
Despite the fact that there were plenty of galleons lying around, Ivan shook his head and declined Harry's offer. In many people's minds, this might seem stupid, as one could achieve one's goal by simply stretching out one's hand, and no matter how much money one borrowed, one could simply return it in the future. Ivan, however, disagreed, as he believed that accepting Harry's offer now meant that he owed him a favor, which was not good for Ivan, who did not want to get too involved in Dumbledore's schemes. Besides, there was still time. He could always borrow money from Harry when he ran out of ideas. With Ivan's deliberate change of subject, Harry soon forgot about it, and the group drifted off to talk about the upcoming Quidditch game. As Gryffindor House's hidden trump card, Harry was not as confident as everyone thought he would be, but rather nervous. He could not imagine how disappointed Wood would be if Gryffindor lost the match because he could not catch the golden snitch. Ivan, on the other hand, was full of confidence in Harry's ability to fly, as no one knew better than him, and with Harry's own luck, Gryffindor would have a hard time losing unless it was a plot kill. Given Harry's loyalty, Ivan was even more prepared to keep an eye on Chino on the day of the match to avoid any mishaps. They unknowingly arrived at the Great Hall of Hogwarts, and Ivan was about to enjoy his lunch at the Gryffindor table when he heard Malfoy, sitting at the next table, jeering at Gryffindor's repeated defeats by Slytherin. Infuriated, Ron tried to beat Malfoy up, but Harry and Hermione managed to stop him, and a brawl broke out in the Great Hall. While the trio argued, Ivan approached Malfoy. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy, who was still ranting, saw Ivan approaching and his smile turned to one of disgust and a hint of fear. After all, news of Ivan killing the troll had spread like wildfire around the house, and even Professor McGonagall had admitted that Malfoy feared Ivan was after him. Malfoy soon realized that they were at the Slytherin table, and Ivan was unlikely to get into trouble with him there, so he had the courage to reprimand him sternly.
Hales, what are you doing here? Nothing, I just wanted to make a bet with you.
Ivan smiled as he took out 3 galleons and placed them on the table.
Let's bet on Harry catching the golden snitch and winning the next game.
Said Ivan. Malfoy looked at the 3 galleons on the table and did not immediately agree. This small amount of money was nothing to Malfoy, but he still remembered being scammed by Ivan, so Malfoy had to wonder if Ivan was up to something. As for Harry's role as Gryffindor's secret weapon, it was revealed during his training sessions with Malfoy.
It's fine if you don't want to gamble. I thought you'd make a profit on what little money you have.
Ivan shook his head nonchalantly, put away the galleons, and prepared to leave.
Wait.
Chapter 33, Business Genius Weasley.
Why don't we raise the stakes?
Malfoy clapped his hands, and Crabbe and Goyle, who were behind him, immediately dug into their pockets, only to find 2 galleons and 8 sickles. Malfoy was embarrassed to see his 2 henchmen so poor, and immediately took out 4 galleons from his wizard robes and slammed them on the table.
I've only got 3 galleons, 15 sickles, and 20 nuts.
Ivan, seeing that Malfoy had taken the bait, deftly took all the money out of his pocket. Malfoy raised his eyebrows and smiled.
It doesn't matter.
Malfoy was trying to empty Ivan's pockets. If he lost, it would be a mere 4 galleons, but if he won, then damn Ivan would be hard-pressed for a very long time. Although meals and accommodation were free of charge at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the cost of daily necessities, extracurricular potion-making materials, gifts, and snacks were all paid for. Malfoy was looking forward to seeing Ivan borrow money to get by.
All right, then it's a deal.
Malfoy offered to give Ivan money, and Ivan wasn't about to turn him down. 1 more galleon could buy a lot more materials. As for whether he would lose, Yvonne thought the odds were pathetic. If she couldn't bet on that, how could she earn galleons fast, in her dreams? Ivan was extremely pleased that he had successfully conned Malfoy. By the end of the game, he would have 7 galleons, which should be enough to satisfy most of his needs.
Ivan, what did you say to Malfoy?
In a good mood, Ivan returned to the Gryffindor table, and Harry and Ron immediately came up to him and asked him about it. The conversation between Ivan and Malfoy wasn't loud, so they didn't hear much.
Nothing, it's just that Malfoy and I have a bet that Harry will catch the golden snitch and Gryffindor will win the match in a few days.
Said Ivan.
How could you? Gambling is not a good thing. What if Professor McGonagall found out?
Hermione scowled.
Come on, who's going to tell Professor McGonagall if you don't?
Ron demanded. After hearing Ivan's words, Ron wanted to bet against Malfoy. Harry, on the other hand, felt the pressure on him increasing.
Ivan, we just overheard you talking to Malfoy. I wonder if you'd be interested in making some galleons with us.
Fred echoed George.
Work together to develop magical tricks.
Yvonne asked, intrigued by the long-awaited creation of magical objects.
How did you know we were planning to develop this?
George and Fred looked at each other in surprise.
Isn't it?
Yvonne asked, giving a noncommittal shrug. He couldn't very well claim to know their future.
Of course not. At the very least, we're short of the funds we need to develop it. If we're ready, you're welcome to join us.
Since Ivan didn't want to talk about it, George didn't bother to ask, and Fred got straight to the point.
What we mean is to make a bet for the rest of the game. We're sure to make a killing. But we were short of funds and couldn't get involved as a player, so we thought of you.
When they finished, they looked nervously at Ivan.
You're not trying to fake a match and lose on purpose, are you?
Yvonne asked, thinking of the possibility.
How is that possible? Are we like that?
George shouted angrily, and Fred said angrily.
Besides, we Gryffindor have been losing for years. Who's going to bet on us? You can't make a galleon by faking a match.
Yvonne's apology died in her throat. She thought Wood would cry if he knew what they were thinking. George and Fred, on the other hand, got more excited as they talked.
With our ace Harry on the team, we're going to have a major upset. He's the best seeker I've ever seen, and we're going to win. Yes, and then the betting will be able to raise the Slytherin odds high and lower the Gryffindor odds, and the Slytherins will be so angry they'll pay up.
The more they talked, the more crooked their ideas became, to the point of trying to bribe Lee Jordan, who was a match commentator, into giving them trouble with words. Even though he was a fanatical Gryffindor and tended to side with Gryffindor when it came to collecting money for a match. Ivan wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, suddenly thinking that it would be a waste of Joel's talent to only have one joke shop in the future, and that he should be running a regular Quidditch game instead. Guaranteed to make a killing.
Okay.
Yvonne pondered for a moment and decided that George and Fred's plan was sound. Given the proud nature of Slytherins, they would most likely be dragged into this mess, and it would give them an early taste of the hardships of the world.
5 galleons, that's all we've got.
Joel and Fred gritted their teeth and took out all the money they had.
With what I have, the principal should be sufficient.
Ivan nodded and then discussed the details with the other two. Ivan was silent for a moment before speaking again.
Don't tell Jordan about the bet, though. If it gets out, he'll have to punish you more harshly as a commentator. Okay, sure.
George thought about it and nodded cautiously. Fred said at that moment,
We'll cast a secrecy charm on everyone involved, and anyone who breaks it or snitches will be severely punished. So the contract is valid?
Ivan asked, holding out his right wrist.
Yes, the contract is in.
The Weasleys did the same, and Joel waved his wand, causing a mark to appear on their wrists. Ivan looked at the system column and saw that there was indeed an extra status there. The effect was to make the tongue 5 times larger after breaking the contract for a whole week. Though not particularly severe, it should be sufficient to deter underage wizards and witches. In fact, given the proud nature of the Slytherin house wizards, they would never rat on anyone, no matter how angry they were. Ivan's lips curled at the thought.
That should cover the cost of the potion.
Chapter 34, The Tragic Quarrel. With this plan in mind, the Weasleys became enemies. wandering around Slytherin's table every day and threatening to destroy their old rival Slytherin with a new tactic. There was also a quiet rumor that Ivan, the hero of Gryffindor, had recently made a bet that if Gryffindor won, it would be 10-1, and if Slytherin won, they would win as much as they bet. When the young Slytherin witches and wizards heard this, they were so angry that they began to jump up and down. Being the wealthiest house in Hogwarts, Ivan was not short of money, and soon received several galleons, though most of them were sickles and nuts. After all, this bet was just for fun, and the participants were all young wizards, so the bet was usually just a few bronze nuts or a silver sickle.
Harry, come on, you have to catch the golden snitch.
Backstage, George gazed solemnly at Harry and spoke, as if this Quidditch match concerned the very survival of the world.
Yeah, or we'd be eating dirt.
Fred nodded in agreement. Fred's words confused Harry, as more than one person had said them to him over the past few days. At first, Harry felt a heavy sense of responsibility, believing that his fellow students were encouraging him, but he soon found out that Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and even the Hufflepuff students were saying strange things to him. This frustrated Harry, but he could not find anything amiss. Captain Wood warned Harry, who seemed distracted, after giving an encouraging speech.
Don't be distracted, Harry, the game is on. Yeah.
Harry nodded, trying to calm his nerves. The gates of the stadium flew open, and the Gryffindor team flew out on their brooms, Harry behind them. After passing through the slightly darkened backstage area, Harry found himself in a wide, circular arena. The seats, which were usually empty, were already full, and the Gryffindor seats were filled with cheers. Ron and Neville were now holding up a huge banner made of torn sheets, which Hermione had bewitched to flicker.
Potter must die.
In midair, Harry was touched but strangely did not see Ivan there, and after looking around, he managed to spot Ivan sitting in the stands near Slytherin. Harry, wondering why Ivan was sitting there, saw him smile and point his wand at the sky. A short time later, a fiery beam of light shot up into the sky and exploded dozens of feet into the air, its faint light forming the words,
Gryffindor must win, Harry Potter go.
Harry felt a sudden warmth in his heart, and instead of thinking about his earlier question, he concentrated on the game that was about to begin. On Ivan's side, after cheering Harry on with magic, Ivan began the day's task of keeping an eye on Quirrell. Indeed, Ivan would not have had anything to do with Quirrell this term if the outcome of the Quidditch match had not directly concerned his sudden wealth or his sudden bankruptcy. After all, during this period, Ivan was arguably the only one who knew that Lord Voldemort resided at the back of Quirrell's head, other than the elusive Dumbledore, who might have sensed it. Ivan felt rather guilty about having to deal with a final boss indirectly in his first year. Fortunately, Ivan didn't actually have to do anything other than sit and watch Quirrell from time to time. Ivan didn't believe that Quirrell would dare to cast a spell while Ivan was watching him.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Ivan's occasional stares made Quirrell, who was sitting curled up in the corner, uncomfortable as if his secrets had been seen through. Ivan also realized that staring at Quirrell so openly would make him suspicious, so he pretended to be curious and chatted awkwardly with Quirrell.
Professor Quirrell, I hear you once encountered a vampire in the jungles of Romania. Is that true? Oh.
Quirrell stammered.
Really? Then, Professor, how did you defeat the zombies in Africa?
Ivan was very nervous about talking to the Dark Lord indirectly for the first time. He didn't even know what to talk about. Would it be too deliberate to talk about learning in such a cheerful atmosphere? Yvonne had to start with lighter topics.
That's enough.
Chapter 35. I've worked for the Academy, I want to see Professor Dumbledore. Despite his anger, Quirrell was a man of integrity. When he realized that he had lost his composure, he quickly composed himself and tried to find an excuse.
I'm sorry.
With that, Quirrell pulled up his hood to cover his head, then leaned forward and closed his eyes.
All right.
Ivan shut his mouth decisively and stopped trying to provoke Quirrell. He had achieved his goal. He dared to tease Quirrell because he knew that Quirrell would not attack him over such a minor argument. In the original novel, the Weasleys hit Quirrell on the back of the head with a snowball, where Voldemort's snake face was located. Quirrell's lack of reaction to such a blunt slap to Voldemort's face suggested that the possession of the Philosopher's Stone came first in their minds. As for settling accounts later, save it, Quirrell would be long gone by then, and a fleeing Lord Voldemort would not care about a minor player like him. Seeing that Quirrell was really going to close his eyes and go to sleep, Ivan turned his attention to the match. The game had reached its climax, and the two sides were engaged in small games. A Slytherin chaser threw the quaffle at George, who barely managed to dodge it.
Slytherin, this is a foul.
Jordan Lee, who was in charge of the commentary, was a Gryffindor veteran. He shouted at Slytherin for breaking the rules, his words sharp enough to make Professor McGonagall frown. George, not to be outdone, joined forces with Fred to attack the Slytherin beater from both sides, nearly sending him crashing into the railings.
It's not fair for the commentator to interfere. It's shady.
Jordan dodged cans, scraps of paper, and undergarments as he continued his commentary. When Professor McGonagall couldn't stand it any longer, she asked the two students to pull Jordan away and replace him with Cedric from Hufflepuff. Jordan clung to the railing for dear life, but in the end, he was no match for their combined strength and was dragged along the platform.
I have gone too far for the house.
Professor McGonagall raised her hand and cast a silent spell. The world finally fell silent.
Wake.
The sleeping Quirrell. Wasn't it just a competition of acting skills? Who was afraid of who? Yvonne gritted her teeth and put on an anxious face. She put her hands on Quirrell's thighs and shook him violently.
Professor Quirrell, look, something's wrong with Harry's broomstick. It's falling out of the sky. Do something to save him.
As Ivan shook him violently, Quirrell's hood fell off, revealing a stunned face and a gaping mouth.
Professor, I'm so sorry you didn't see it. It was such a close call.
Ivan exclaimed, pulling his hands away from Quirrell's legs as Harry regained control of his broom. In the stands, there were many other people who were as concerned about Harry as Ivan was, including Malfoy, who was so excited that he stood up from his seat, anticipating when Harry would fall from the sky. In that case, Dame Yvonne would have to hand over all her savings and live the rest of the term on borrowed time. This was the only way Malfoy could think of to get back at him when he thought he was outmatched.
Draco, look, Potter is really falling.
Chapter 36, Marauder's Map. When the match was over, George and Fred didn't even attend the celebrations, but went to find Ivan instead. Ivan also piled 15 galleons and a large amount of silver sickles and bronze nuts on the table. In accordance with the agreed-upon split, Ivan received 40% of the proceeds, which amounted to 6 galleons, 19 sickles, and 28 nuts. Ivan's haul actually included a bet with Malfoy.
That much?
George asked excitedly, looking at the money on the table. They might have been able to fork out 5 galleons in the past, but that was something that the two of them had painstakingly saved up over the years, unlike now, where they could easily earn that much.
Wouldn't we be rich if we could do this every year?
Fred fantasized.
Forget it, it's not a good idea to do something like that. Once is enough. Besides, the secrecy charm isn't really 100% secret. If this goes on, something's going to go wrong.
Ivan shook his head to dispel their unrealistic hopes. George and Fred looked at each other, their smiles fading as they nodded cautiously.
Of course, we don't want to get caught, and the money should be enough to get us started. Later on, we'll be able to earn galleons by selling our joke toys. We talked about it and decided to hire you as our special advisor. What do you say?
Fred's jovial manner returned at the mention of a joke toy, and the serious atmosphere was swept away.
No problem, as long as I have the time.
Ivan agreed without thinking too much about it. After all, there was still a magical item in the system column that hadn't moved yet, so he might be able to gain some proficiency with the Weasleys. We also need a bit of supplies, and we've prepared a present for you. George magically pulled a rectangular object out of his sleeve, folded it up, and handed it to Ivan.
You can guess how it works.
Fred said with a grin. Ivan, naturally, recognized the Marauder's map at once and, with a hint of excitement, took the parchment and laid it out flat. Ivan was not surprised. He put the tip of his wand against it and spoke solemnly.
I solemnly swear I did no good.
The delicate lines of ink suddenly spread from the tip of Ivan's wand like a spider's web, reaching every corner of the parchment. The moon face, the worm tail, the padfoot, and the pointed fork.
Ivan, you've used something like this before.
George asked. Ivan shook his head and explained.
No, I just happen to know something about the makers of the Marauder's map.
By the way, why did you give me something so precious?
Yvonne asked curiously. The Marauder's map was of great importance to the Weasleys, who were keen to get things done at school. It is safe to say that the Weasleys did not have to worry about being caught doing anything at school. George's smile faded a little as he looked at the gold galleons on the table.
Fred and I don't know what you're going to do with all this money, but we're guessing that once you've got it, you're not going to stay in school.
That much? George asked excitedly, looking at the money on the table. They might have been able to fork out 5 galleons in the past, but that was something that the two of them had painstakingly saved up over the years, unlike now, where they could easily earn that much. Wouldn't we be rich if we could do this every year? Fred fantasized. Forget it, it's not a good idea to do something like that. Once is enough. Besides, the secrecy charm isn't really 100% secret. If this goes on, something's going to go wrong. Ivan shook his head to dispel their unrealistic hopes. George and Fred looked at each other, their smiles fading as they nodded cautiously. Of course, we don't want to get caught, and the money should be enough to get us started. Later on, we'll be able to earn galleons by selling our joke toys. We talked about it and decided to hire you as our special advisor. What do you say? Fred's jovial manner returned at the mention of a joke toy, and the serious atmosphere was swept away. No problem, as long as I have the time, Ivan agreed without thinking too much about it. After all, there was still a magical item in the system column that hadn't moved yet, so he might be able to gain some proficiency with the Weasleys. We also need a bit of supplies, and we've prepared a present for you. George magically pulled a rectangular object out of his sleeve, folded it up, and handed it to Ivan. You can guess how it works, Fred said with a grin. Ivan, naturally, recognized the Marauder's map at once and, with a hint of excitement, took the parchment and laid it out flat. Ivan was not surprised. He put the tip of his wand against it and spoke solemnly. I solemnly swear I did no good. The delicate lines of ink suddenly spread from the tip of Ivan's wand like a spider's web, reaching every corner of the parchment. The moon face, the worm tail, the padfoot, and the pointed fork.
Yeah, well, we don't want anything to happen to the special advisor we just got.
Fred said, patting Ivan on the shoulder.
Thank you.
Yvonne was touched, but she didn't thank him. If he could in the future, he would try to rewrite the results of Fred's death, as the brothers were interesting.
By the way, have you ever been to Hogsmeade?
Ivan asked, putting away the Marauder's map.
Of course, so that's where you're going.
Fred was relieved. He and George had hesitated to give Ivan the Marauder's map because they were worried that he would slip out of Hogwarts and go somewhere dangerous. To her surprise, Ivan only wanted to go to Hogsmeade, where it was relatively safe. The two of them did not hide anything and immediately told him everything they knew about Hogsmeade. George and Fred used the Marauder's map to sneak out of the house, but they never went out for too long, so their knowledge of the place was limited. George hesitated for a moment before speaking solemnly to Yvonne.
You may be the hero of Gryffindor, and you have slain a troll, but I must warn you to be careful. Wizards are not as stupid as trolls.
Chapter 37, Sneaking into Hogsmeade. After saying goodbye to the Weasleys, Ivan returned to the Gryffindor lounge alone. On the way, Ivan also found out that there was a new information about the Marauder's map in the system inventory. Magical item, Marauder's map. Magic strong. Description: this is a map of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, which shows all living people at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Powerful level magic surprised Ivan, but when he thought about how the Marauder's map could monitor even Dumbledore's movements, he took it for granted. It is unknown how James Potter, Sirius, and Lupin managed to create such powerful magical tools over a decade ago. Peter Pettigrew, close at hand, might also know something. With the Marauder's map, Ivan was actually capable of turning Peter Pettigrew in, but Ivan was not prepared to do so. Sirius did not want to face Dumbledore again for a while, partly because he had seen Scabbers in the papers and partly because he was still under suspicion. With the Marauder's map in hand, Ivan was more confident in his plan to sneak out and buy the potions he needed. All he needed was a free moment. In the Gryffindor restroom, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were gathered around the burning stove, although their faces were not as relaxed as Ivan had hoped.
Hey, Yvonne, where have you been?
Ron asked when he saw her.
You'll have to ask your brothers.
Ivan replied simply, changing the subject.
Are you celebrating Harry catching the golden snitch? Come on, we were discussing how my broom got out of hand during the match.
Harry said, shaking his head.
That must have been Snape.
Ron said angrily.
That's right, I saw Professor Snape trying to pull a fast one on Harry's broomstick, and when Harry's broom got out of order, Snape shut up.
Hermione did not take Snape's side this time, as she had seen it with her own eyes, and Harry was one of her best friends. As a result of Ivan's timely handling of the problem, Harry was able to get out of harm's way before Hermione even got to work, and the grandstand did not catch on fire. Yvonne listened as the trio discussed the possibility of Snape's involvement in Harry's murder.
Harry, it was Professor Sino who caused your broomstick to go wrong. I was sitting next to him and interrupted his spell.
Ivan briefly explained how he had found Chino pretending to be asleep and secretly casting a spell, to Harry's disbelief.
Professor Chino, how is that possible? Then why did Hermione?
Ron was incredulous.
Apparently one of them was trying to save you by casting a counter curse, and if it had been Chino, he wouldn't have had to hide like this.
Ivan explained.
Perhaps Professor Chino is afraid of Snape's revenge.
Harry said, stumbling over his words. Harry was beginning to believe Ivan's story, but he could not accept the possibility that Snape would save him. Ron and Hermione were also skeptical, even though Snape's eyes and actions made it clear that he wished Harry were dead. Yvonne sighed but didn't try to defend Snape. After all, the situation was complicated, and it was best to leave it to the parties involved. All we can say is that Snape attracted too much hatred at Gryffindor.
Just stay away from them for the rest of the school year anyway.
Ivan eventually said.
But I was far enough away from them, and yet one of them tried to kill me.
Harry was furious. He had been targeted by Snape ever since he had entered Hogwarts, and now Chino was threatening to murder him. Harry could not understand why so many people were after him. There was a burst of relief, and Harry began to calm down, after which they told Ivan about the information they had obtained from Hagrid after their match, which Hermione concluded.
So, between Snape and Chino, there must have been an attempt to sneak through the trapdoor guarded by the three-headed dog to find what Dumbledore was hiding inside. By the way, Ivan, do you know anything about Nicholas Flamel?
Hermione asked, suddenly struck by the question that had been puzzling them all afternoon. Ivan hesitated, unsure if he should let them know about the Philosopher's Stone at this point, but eventually shook his head. For one thing, the longer he brewed the potion, the more secure it would be, and for another, breaking Dumbledore's plan for raising a savior could have serious consequences, and Ivan did not want to be asked out a second time. Although his occlumency had been raised to level 2, it was not enough to deal with Dumbledore's Dementor. As for whether Chino will get the stone at this time, Ivan is not worried. Because Dumbledore, the sly old fox, had not yet placed the Mirror of Eris inside, Dumbledore would have to wait until he was certain that Harry would pass the test of the Mirror of Eris. Chino would be damned if he could find the stone now.
Left and right parting.
Chapter 38, I'm sorry they don't sell love potions here. After a long walk, Ivan arrived at the end of the corridor and lifted the trapdoor to find himself in a cellar full of note boxes. Ivan realized that this must be Honeyjuke's sweet shop in Hogsmeade. Creek,
Just now, maybe you didn't see it.
Yvonne said, teasing him. Ivan's casual attitude convinced Honeyjuke's boss that he was not here to steal the sweets, and his tone became much more pleasant.
You must have sneaked out of Hogwarts, didn't you? Third-year brats aren't nearly as short as you. No wonder I didn't see you earlier.
Ivan's mouth twitched, and he regretted not having learned a spell such as the silencing charm. He was considered quite high in his first year. Ivan gloomily took a silver sickle from his pocket and placed it on the table.
So you're not going to sell me sweets? Of course it's for sale,
Said Honeyjuice's boss as he collected the silver sickles at a speed that Ivan could not see.
What are you going to get? Sizzling honeybees, chocolate frogs, bottling beans, how about a cockroach pile? It's your headmistress's favorite.
Ivan bought some as well and was curious enough to try Dumbledore's favorites, and had to admit that the pile of cockroaches was disgusting to look at. Yvonne carefully pulled off the leg and tasted it despite her disgust. It was sweet, apparently made of treacle but crunchy to the teeth, as if she were actually chewing a worm.
By the way, do you know any places in Hogsmeade where they sell potion ingredients?
Ivan asked casually, after trying a few more chocolate frogs and bifuzi beans.
There's only one potion shop in Hogsmeade.
Said Honeyjuice's boss, his expression suddenly serious as he looked around. Ivan's heart was racing, and he was wondering if he had said the wrong thing when his boss leaned down and lowered his voice.
If you want to buy love potions, you'd better go to Diagon Alley. It's been very thorough lately, and old Rick doesn't sell contraband.
Love potions? Yvonne rolled her eyes. Why would he buy one? He's only 11 years old. He's powerless even if he has a heart. Ignoring the sly smile on the Honeyjuice boss's face as he left, Ivan turned into the alley and saw a half-collapsed sign with the words,
Potion.
faintly visible on it, and a strange, foul-smelling potion inside. Ivan entered the room with his hand over his nose. He could not see the owner of the place, but he could see a faint green smoke coming from the room at the end of the hall. Yvonne was about to say something to get his attention when she heard a noise coming from the room.
The basic potion ingredients are at the door, and the Polyjuice potion and booster are in the cupboard next to it.
Yvonne could not be bothered to complain about the love potion any longer. How many young wizards had asked her about it? Ivan self-consciously goes to where the potion ingredients are. Fortunately, his potioneering skills had been upgraded to level 4, and he was able to quickly sort out the ingredients for the Bloodline fusion potion. In order to prevent anyone from guessing the potion's recipe based on the ingredients he selected, Ivan also made some adjustments to the quantity of herbs that he did not need. When Ivan opened the door, he was greeted by the pungent smell of a potion, which he had noticed earlier at the shop.
What are you doing with all these ingredients?
Rick asked, expecting Ivan to be there to buy the booster.
Money.
Ivan took out 9 galleons and placed them on the table. Rick SR fell silent at once, quietly pocketed the money and handed Ivan 12 sickles.
Where are the bone-attaching herb and hemolytic herb?
Ivan asked, taking the rest of the silver sickles. Rick Sr.'s face changed. He leaned over and fixed his bloodshot eyes on Ivan.
I don't know what strange recipes you found in the Hogwarts library, but I would advise you not to try them at random. Bone passing and hemolytic are both prohibited ingredients, and only a few advanced potions are used. What if I offered you double the galleons?
Ivan asked.
An ounce of bone-attaching grass is 3 galleons.
Rick Sr.'s eyes were full of sarcasm.
When it doubles.
Ivan frowned.
No, before that.
Old Rick laughed. Why don't you go rob a bank? Yvonne almost blurted out, knowing that 17 sickles an ounce in Diagon Alley was probably worth as much as dragon blood. Even if it was because of the dragon's breeding and the plummeting prices, it was still a top-notch material. How could one bone-attaching herb and hemolytic herb sell for so much money?
Like I said, it's contraband. Every sale has to be recorded, and it's not sold anywhere to a young wizard like you.
Rick Sr. could tell that the young wizard in front of him didn't have as much galleons as he had expected, and he immediately lost interest, but he still reminded him.
And even if you pay me, I can't give it to you right now. It'll take a while.
Chapter 39, Christmas. In Diagon Alley or Nocturne Alley, unless the Polyjuice potion was brewed and his strength improved, he would not go. Going there alone was too dangerous for a young first-year wizard. Ivan turned on his heel and left. Before leaving, he bought a bottle of deodorant to remove the smell from his body and threw 12 sickles at Rick Sr. He knew of a place where he was certain to find bone-attaching grasses and hemolytic grasses. It was a risky move, but Ivan had no other options. Heading back the way he came, Ivan was able to pass through the cellar thanks to Honeyjuke's boss, who was entertaining guests. Ivan went to the room of requirement at once.
I want a place to brew.
Ivan said. The next moment, Ivan opened the door to the room of requirement and found himself in an unfamiliar space, surrounded by bottles and equipment for brewing potions. Ivan's only regret was that the cabinets and bottles used for storing potions were empty, without even the most basic herbs.
The room of requirement has its limits.
Ivan said, disappointed. He had wanted to see if he could get some potion ingredients for free. Ivan found a cupboard and stored all the ingredients in it, so that he could use it when brewing potions in the future. With that done, Ivan turned and left without hesitation. Along the way, Ivan caught sight of Quirrell, who was wandering around the fourth floor. Ivan pulled out the Marauder's map to confirm the location of Snape and the other professors and principals. For the next few weeks, Ivan kept an eye on Snape's movements on the Marauder's map, occasionally glancing at Quirrell's. As December approached, the weather grew colder, and on the nights before Christmas, it snowed heavily, and by the time Ivan woke up in the morning, there was a thick layer of snow on the ground. Ivan took the two of them to the fireplace in the lounge to warm them up. He also used a transfiguration charm to create transparent windscreens to block the vents so that the entire lounge could be warmed up. However, the owls that delivered the letter suffered greatly, as several of them crashed into the side windscreen, causing a large number of envelopes to scatter all over the floor. Outside the window, poor Quirrell was being beaten to a pulp by a pile of bewitched snowballs, and Ivan even saw one of the sturdier-looking snowballs hit Quirrell very accurately in the back of the head, causing Ivan to sweat for the Weasleys. These two were probably the only ones who dared to play such a prank on Quirrell. He wondered if this was the peak of their lives.
Ivan's, you're not going back either.
Harry asked curiously.
Well, we're not as comfortable at home as we are at school.
Ivan replied with a smile. As if he had found a connection, Harry and Ivan went through so much trouble that he wanted to stay at Hogwarts forever rather than return to his so-called uncle's house. To Harry's delight, Ron and the Weasley brothers were staying as well, as their parents were traveling to Romania to visit Charlie. Harry's only regret was that Hermione had to go home, otherwise this Christmas would have been perfect.
See what I found. A couple of kids no one's planning to keep in school.
Malfoy exclaimed dramatically, turning back to Ron.
And Weasley, your mother must have thought she'd given birth to too many children and abandoned you.
Ron angrily charged forward and punched him. Malfoy drew his wand to cast a counterspell, and his two henchmen Crabbe and Goyle surrounded him. Even faster than them, Ivan disarmed Malfoy's wand with a single disarming charm, and the remaining two blockheads, who only knew how to use their fists, were thrown to the ground by Ivan's leglock spells. Unable to fight back, Malfoy was forced to take a right hook from Ron. Ron tried to attack again, but an invisible barrier appeared in front of Malfoy and blocked Ron's fist. Snape came down the stairs with a scowl on his face, waving his wand casually to undo the effects of the spell on Crabbe and Goyle. 10 points were deducted from Gryffindor for beating up fellow students and abusing magic on campus.
Professor, it was Malfoy who...
Harry began to argue, but Snape spoke again.
15 points are now deducted.
Ivan stopped Harry and Ron, who were about to speak further, as the three of them would not have stood a chance against Snape if he had disarmed him with a wave of his wand. Since he couldn't win and Snape was a professor, he would be at a disadvantage.
Snape's got it in for us, and if you ask me, Harry, the last time you had a problem with your broom, it was Snape.
Ron complained.
Snape has deducted nearly 100 points from us Griffins over the course of the term.
Chapter 40, Deathly Hallows and Gifts. A few days later, when the opportunity Ivan had been waiting for had not presented itself, Quirrell seemed to have become more cautious and did not move much for several days. Ivan had no choice but to focus on the upcoming Christmas and prepare a Christmas present for Harry and the others, thanks to the amount of galleons Ivan had left over after purchasing the ingredients. Half of the time was spent in the library, and the other half was spent with the Weasley brothers, who, when they had sufficient funds, were eager to pursue their careers, taking advantage of the holidays to study the making of magical objects. Ivan, as special advisor, was of course among them, having achieved a breakthrough in his magical item making, which had not grown since the beginning of term. As a result of the upgrade, Ivan planned to give Ron a set of wizarding flags as a Christmas present, which would save him some galleons. He gave Hermione his reading notes, which contained a large number of spell-casting tricks that he believed the young witch would enjoy. As for Harry's present, Ivan couldn't think of anything special that he would like, so he simply gave him a small Christmas gift box, in which the 4 figures would pop out and sing Merry Christmas to each other. These 4 figures were Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ivan himself. On the Weasley brothers' side, Ivan sent several toffees, which he had developed in advance in imitation of their work in the book, in the hope that they would feel surprise after eating them. Ivan is also looking forward to the presents he will receive tomorrow.
God, that's a cool wizard's flag.
Ron was fiddling with his wizarding flag. The flags were made with beautiful and ornate skins, and the soldiers were transformed into wizards in robes, and the knights were replaced with unicorns and the Strals, as well as advanced units such as dragons. Although there were no changes to the rules, the game was like a wizarding war from the perspective of the various configurations. Ivan also enchanted the battlefield with various light effects. Ron was delighted, but asked who Dumbledore's opponent was.
You know who?
Ron asked, shuddering at the possibility.
No, Grindelwald.
Ivan explained.
Who's that?
Harry asked when he heard Ron mention you-know-who.
Don't you remember, Professor Dumbledore's greatest achievement, aside from discovering the uses of dragon's blood, was defeating the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945.
Ivan reminded them. It occurred to Harry that he had been given one of Dumbledore's cards, and it said so. Harry then managed to unwrap the present Ivan had given him, which had the ability to play Christmas songs out of character, almost making him think it was the best Christmas gift he had ever received. This lasted until he removed a strange, silvery gray, liquid-like fabric from the last package.
What's this?
Harry asked curiously, touching it.
It's an invisibility cloak.
Ivan said, glancing at it with interest.
Can I touch it?
Of course.
Harry held out the cloak and Yvonne took it. At the same time, Ivan noticed that there was an extra item in his system's magical artifacts column about the cloak of invisibility. Magical item, invisibility cloak, Deathly Hallows. Magic Extreme. Description: legend has it that this is a Deathly Hallows crafted by the Grim Reaper himself using the Grim Reaper's cloak as a material. It possesses unimaginable magical powers and allows the wearer to hide from detection.
Isn't it just a permanently enhanced version of the disillusionment charm? It's so exaggerated.
Ivan muttered. Judging from the book's performance, the Deathly Trio seems to be an undeserving title to Ivan. Under the protection of the Cloak of Invisibility, Harry would not only be seen through by Dumbledore, Snape, and the others, but he would also be seen through by Moody's magical eye, and would not be able to hide from the Dementors. The Resurrection Stone's only function was to summon the spirits of the dead to communicate. The only thing of note is the Elder Wand, which provides a boost to the fighting abilities of wizards such as Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort, although the owner of the wand changes after a defeat in battle. Ivan complained as he tried to put the cloak on. As Ivan vanished into thin air before Harry and Ron's eyes, Harry tried to reach out to her and felt a film of water. Ivan was in his invisibility cloak, and he was experiencing the strange sensation of being completely separated from the outside world by a thin layer of invisibility cloak. Ivan tried to take a few steps and made a deliberate noise to ask if Harry and the others could hear him, and concluded that the cloak of invisibility did indeed act as a barrier, although it was a far cry from the complete invisibility he had imagined. I wonder how it got such a strong review from the system.
A very useful prop.
Chapter 41, Howlers and Special Christmas Gifts. 10 of the galleons were given to him by Harry, and Ivan was puzzled at first, but then he realized that Harry must have remembered that he was short of money. As it was a gift, Ivan eventually accepted it as insurance. The rest of the presents were signed by Hermione and consisted of all the notes she had taken since she started school, as thick as a book. Ivan smiled at the fact that the girl had the same idea as him. The two round, unidentified objects were sent by the Weasleys without any description, although Ivan thought they looked like dung balls used for mischief in the book. Ron gave him a bag of sweets that were cheap, and Ivan tried to see how they were different from the others, but to no avail.
I didn't know you'd give me something so interesting. I thought it was a bag of sweets, too.
Ron, who was flying the new wizarding flag with Harry, noticed Ivan's actions and his freckled face turned red.
It's nothing, and it's a great gift. It's enough to last me a few days.
Ivan waved his hand quickly, indicating that he didn't mind, but the other high-quality gifts made him think that Ron's gifts were different.
And Ron, your sweets are really good.
Harry opened one of Ron's sweets and popped it into his mouth. His expression changed slightly when he bit into it, but he still smiled happily. Ron was finally able to calm down from his awkward situation. He had no choice. Before he went to school, Mrs. Weasley only gave him 2 sickles as pocket money. No matter how he tried to save them, they were almost gone. After consoling Ron's fragile mind, Ivan turned his attention to the last present, which was a Christmas present from his mother, Alicia. It was a shimmering, crescent-shaped pendant with an envelope attached to the bottom. The design was different from the others and it moved of its own accord. Ivan could tell that something was wrong. It was a howler. Sure enough, the letter flew into the air and began to scream.
Ivan Harles.
Who gave you permission to sign an application to stay at Hogwarts without permission, not even a letter of inquiry before Christmas? I've been waiting for you at the station for 5 hours.
The high-pitched voice echoed throughout the small dormitory. Even when Ivan covered his ears with his hands, he could not hear anything. The screaming went on for half an hour, until Ivan was finally silenced by a torrent of abuse and a warning that the crescent pendant on the table must be kept with him at all times and that it must not be removed without her permission. Harry and Ron were also shocked by the letter, and when the screaming stopped, Ron rubbed his ears and thought he was going deaf.
Ivan, who sent you this howler? It's as loud as my mother.
Ron said.
Of course it's my mother.
Ivan sighed helplessly. He had been wondering why he had forgotten something. It turned out that he had forgotten to send a letter to his mother, Alicia, whom he had never met at Christmas. However, he could not be blamed for this. After all, Ivan had been hiding from him for a long time. How could he possibly initiate contact?
Your mother wasn't very nice to you, like my uncle-in-law.
Harry asked sympathetically. In his opinion, the only other possible reason for staying on for Halloween was because Ron was temporarily absent.
It's just a minor disagreement, nothing that drastic.
Chapter 42. Yes, Snape stole the potion. Ivan's anxiety was not alleviated by the fact that he had obtained a life-saving crescent pendant. Instead, he became more determined to brew the Bloodline fusion potion as soon as possible to improve his strength. Unfortunately, Quirrell was very well behaved throughout the holidays. Ivan was disappointed and was about to think of something else when Quirrell's name flashed across the Marauders map and disappeared into the Forbidden Forest. Perhaps because of the scandalous nature of what Quirrell was doing, his name was not on the Marauders map, which meant that Ivan was the only one in the school who knew where Quirrell was. Even more gratifying to Ivan was the fact that Snape was not in his office at the moment. A few days later, during a potions lesson, Snape's scowl seemed to darken even further, and the entire class was a disaster for the young Gryffindor wizards, including Hermione and Ivan.
Is Snape crazy? He deducted 45 points from all of us Gryffindor today.
Ron complained as he left Snape's basement. Harry also nodded fearfully, 10 of which he had deducted. Hermione was equally angry, as Snape's reason for deducting points was ridiculous. She had been kind enough to correct Seamus's mistake, but Snape had deducted 5 points for interfering. Ivan sighed. He was in the opposite situation, having his points deducted on the grounds that he was sitting on his hands while the rest of the students made mistakes.
I heard that Snape's potion storeroom had been broken into, and that he had lost a lot of precious materials, so much so that Snape threatened to search all of Hogwarts in his third-year classes.
I reckon Snape's been getting on the wrong side of too many people on a regular day, and someone's trying to get back at him. And if Snape had been a bit more fair in his lessons, like Professor McGonagall, no one would have bothered him.
Ron guessed. Hermione and Harry began to speculate, but to no avail.
What do you think, Ivans?
Hermione asked when Ivan remained silent.
Maybe Snape did it to himself.
Ivan suggested casually. Snape. Harry and the others were confused. Why would Snape steal their potions? Oh wait, Snape didn't even have to steal it, okay? It was his potion vault.
Have you forgotten about the trapdoor under the three-headed dog, Fluffy? Someone's been trying to get through it, and only Hagrid knows how to get through.
Yvonne said without elaborating.
The Polyjuice potion. Snape must have used it to disguise himself as someone Hagrid knew to get information out of him.
Hermione guessed, immediately catching Ivan's drift. Harry was also excited, as he had seen Snape injured in the thigh the other day. Snape must have used up a lot of ingredients to brew the potion, which he used to heal himself, but he did not want Dumbledore to find out, so he disguised it as the herbs and stole them. After all, although the potion storeroom was in Snape's office, it was technically Hogwarts property, and the school paid for most of the galleons spent on potion ingredients. Harry suddenly felt as if he had seen through the truth, and was eager to share his thoughts with Ivan, Hermione, and Ron.
That must be it, Harry, and you're right. We'll tell Professor Dumbledore now. We'll thwart Snape's evil plans.
Ron was immediately on steroids, a sense of duty and purpose surging through him. Ivan was a little ashamed. He had not expected Harry and the others to imagine something like this just because he had said it casually.
I never knew you had such a vivid imagination.
Snape's deep voice came from behind them. Ron's excitement was quelled, and the fire burning in his heart was extinguished.
Professor.
Harry stammered, turning his head with difficulty. Hermione was equally shocked, and Ivan was the only one who pretended to be frightened, as he had meant to speak to Snape. Snape approached the four of them and leaned down slowly, his hollow eyes examining them, his hooked nose almost poking Harry in the head. Harry's mind even began to imagine the horrors that Snape would unleash on them later, the memory charm, some other jinxes, the death curse. After all, they had uncovered Snape's greatest secret.
10 points off Gryffindor.
And left in a hurry.
He let us go.
Harry was incredulous.
Didn't you get points deducted?
Ivan asked.
We know his worst secret. If we tell Professor Dumbledore, he's finished.
Harry didn't give a damn about the points he had been deducted. It wasn't the first time he had been deducted, and he was used to it.
That's the way Snape went to the headmaster's office.
Ivan shook his head, knowing full well that Snape had gone to report to Dumbledore.
And when did we find out Snape's secret? Wasn't that just our guess? Anyone who wanted to get past the Cerberus would have had a motive for doing so, and Quirrell seemed pretty suspicious to me.
Ivan rubbed his chin in deep speculation. Harry and the others were speechless. What did you say Snape did first? You caused them to speculate and Snape caught you red-handed.
Ivan, there must be something you're not telling us.
Hermione's amber eyes were fixed on Ivan, trying to read his expression. Ivan joked, changing the subject. Snape's missing potions were, of course, stolen by him, and in order not to be found out, he took some of the Polyjuice potion and other healing ingredients, as well as a little bit. Chapter 43, Let's Raise Dragons. Snape, however, was apparently clever and suspicious, and by speaking to him directly, he might have aroused suspicion, so Ivan had to beat around the bush. It was through his guidance that Harry and the others were able to guess, in a different way, and eventually reach Snape's ears, telling him to think for himself was the right way to deal with intelligent people. Ivan had not expected things to go so smoothly. At first, he thought Snape's potion store would be full of booby traps, but there was nothing. Yvonne understood when she thought about how Hermione was able to steal the potion ingredients for Polyjuice Potion from Snape in her second year in the book. But she decided to use a deodorant to get rid of her scent so that Snape would not be able to smell her. Yvonne was thinking about it when Hermione grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her away.
Hermione, where are you going?
Harry asked, confused. Hermione looked back and forth.
To get to Hagrid, of course. Whether someone stole Snape's potion or Snape staged it, the easiest way to get past the three-headed dog Fluffy is to use Polyjuice Potion to turn into someone Hagrid knew and ask Hagrid directly.
So all we have to do is ask Hagrid if anyone's been asking him about it lately, and we'll know where to go next.
Harry said excitedly.
Clever.
Hermione nodded. Ivan didn't have any objections. It would be good to go and see Hagrid now. The trio soon arrived at Hagrid's cottage. Unlike usual, there was smoke coming out of the chimney above the fireplace, and Hermione and her party knocked on Hagrid's door. Harry and Ron frowned uncomfortably, for it was too hot in there, and even if they needed a fire in the dead of winter, they didn't have to do this. They had only been in the room for a minute, but beads of sweat were already forming on their foreheads. Yvonne was delighted and turned to look at the stove, which was burning brightly against the wall. Or rather, looking at the large, dark egg in the middle of the fire.
Come.
Hagrid enthusiastically brought a large bowl of rock cakes and some dried meat to place on the table. However, he sat down right in front of the fireplace, blocking Ivan's view. Hermione and Harry also noticed that something was wrong with Hagrid, as he seemed more awkward than usual, wiping his sweat in the hot room rather than opening the window.
Why are you making the house so hot, Hagrid?
Ron complained.
It's nothing.
Hagrid explained with a smile, then quickly pushed the rock cakes and dried meat on the table towards them.
You've got classes this afternoon, right? Finish up and go home.
This made Hermione even more suspicious, but it was clear that she had more important things to attend to.
Hagrid, we've come to ask you something. Snape's potion storeroom was stolen, and we suspect that the thief brewed Polyjuice Potion to disguise himself as someone you know to get to you and get information about Fluffy.
Hagrid was surprised to hear this, but he quickly recovered and muttered something under his breath.
But no one else has ever asked that question.
Hagrid's expression hardened and he cast a suspicious glance at them. Hermione's words had given him a warning, and he wondered if they were actually interested in Norway. Suddenly, Hagrid looked around and saw that someone was missing.
Where's Ivan?
Hagrid asked curiously. Harry and the others were angry at Hagrid for suspecting them, but they soon realized that Ivan had disappeared. While he was puzzling over this, he heard Ivan's voice behind Hagrid.
Is this a dragon egg? It doesn't look very pretty.
With a start, Hagrid sprang to his feet and turned to look behind him, allowing Hermione and the others to see Ivan standing next to the boiler, as well as a large, dark egg the size of their heads.
That's a dragon's egg. Hagrid, where did you get that? It must have cost you a fortune, didn't it?
Ron recognized it at once and excitedly crowded over to Ivan's side as Harry joined him to see the rare dragon's egg. Hermione was the only one to notice the collection of books on the table, such as Breeding Dragons for Pleasure and Profit, the 12 Ways to Keep Dragons, from Zero Basics to Master Dragon Raising, and so on. Hagrid covered his face with his heavily calloused hands, knowing that there would be no hiding it.
Hagrid, it's against the law to keep dragons on your own. If anyone finds out, you'll end up in Azkaban.
Hermione cautioned, despite her interest in dragon eggs.
Don't worry, no one will find out.
Hagrid said, thumping his chest.
I've always wanted a dragon, and I know how to take care of them. I'll never go wrong.
Hermione, however, was worried, as a dragon was so big and so fast-growing that Hagrid's cabin would burst within a month. Hermione turned anxiously to join Ivan in persuading Hagrid, but before she could speak, Ivan spoke excitedly.
Can I take care of it with you when it hatches, Hagrid? I think it's a Norwegian ridgeback.
Hagrid was also surprised that Ivan was able to tell the species of a dragon from a dragon's egg, as even he had to consult various books to find out that this was a Norwegian ridgeback. This means Ivan has a high level of dragon knowledge.
Of course, as long as it doesn't get in the way of lessons, although I must warn you that it might be a bit difficult.
Chapter 44. Add fire and this dragon egg will be ripe. After exchanging half-baked dragon training and dragon breeding techniques, Ivan changed his tune and even ventured a wild guess that raising the temperature might hasten the hatching of the eggs. As soon as Ivan finished speaking, he tried to fill the boiler with firewood and fire it up, but Hagrid stopped him. What a joke! Any hotter and this dragon egg would be cooked.
Ivan, we're not here to discuss dragon breeding.
Harry interrupted when he saw that the conversation was getting heated. I'm here to raise a dragon, thought Ivan, but he noticed Hermione looking at him strangely and changed the subject.
Hagrid, how did you get this dragon egg? I won it, of course. I got it a while back when I was playing cards with a stranger in a pub, and frankly, he was probably dying to get rid of it.
Hagrid's large face was full of pride. How many people won a dragon's egg at a card game?
What did he look like? Was he interested in your three-headed dog, Norway?
Hermione asked, realizing that something was amiss.
Seems so.
Hagrid tried to remember.
I had a bit o' wine, and I told him how much Fluffy liked to listen to music, and as long as he could sleep.
Hagrid said triumphantly. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Hagrid realized that something was wrong. He seemed to have revealed something very important.
Who's that?
Harry demanded. Hagrid realized the urgency of the situation and tried to remember.
I don't know, the man was wearing a black cloak, so I couldn't see his face, and I had a bit o' wine, so all I remember was that his voice was hoarse, and he didn't sound like a normal person. Then it's definitely Snape, or possibly Chino, and they're up to something.
Ron was now more certain than ever that their suspicions in the corridor had been right, and his blood, which had been extinguished by Snape, began to boil again.
Something to do with the last time you mentioned Nicholas Flamel.
Harry wondered and then asked.
Hagrid, can you tell us exactly what's under the trapdoor?
Hermione stared at Hagrid curiously. She had been searching the Hogwarts library for the past few days, searching for famous people in the last 200 years, but she could not find anything about Nicholas Flamel. Hagrid was determined not to divulge any information other than that it was none of their business, and that he would tell Dumbledore about his mistake, even if he had to be punished for it.
It's the Philosopher's Stone.
Ivan exclaimed.
How do you know it's the Philosopher's Stone?
Hagrid asked, shocked, this time because he hadn't said anything. Unbeknownst to Hagrid, however, his words confirmed the truth of Ivan's claims.
The Philosopher's Stone, what's that, what does it do, and how do you know about it, Ivan?
Harry asked hastily.
I saw it by chance when I was making the wizard's flag and looking through the professor's information.
Harry, do you remember what was written in the last line of the card you received regarding Professor Dumbledore? He and his partner, Nicholas Flamel, were very effective in the field of alchemy, and the Philosopher's Stone was created by the famous alchemist Nicholas Flamel.
Ivan explained. Now that Harry and the others had managed to get information out of Hagrid about the passage of the three-headed dog to Norway, Ivan felt he had nothing to hide from them about the Philosopher's Stone. As for its effects, the Philosopher's Stone turns any metal to pure gold and produces the elixir of life, which allows the drinker to live forever. Its creator, Nicholas Flamel, is over 600 years old. Ivan was a little envious. This was something that could grant eternal life. It was hard to say what had caused Nicholas Flamel to destroy it. Ivan would have tried to steal the stone if he hadn't known that it was under Dumbledore's constant supervision. Even Ivan was impressed, let alone Harry and the others, who were hearing about the Philosopher's Stone for the first time. Stone to gold represented endless wealth, and the elixir of life allowed one to live forever. It could be said that getting the Philosopher's Stone was getting everything they wanted.
No wonder Snape or Professor Chino were willing to take the risk of trying to get their hands on it. Who could resist a stone that could make gold?
Ron couldn't help but remark. Fortunately, Harry Potter, Ron Granger, and Hermione Granger were only 11 or 12 years old, so immortality did not appeal to them very much. And apart from Ron, who briefly fantasized about how he would make a fortune using the stone, neither Harry Potter nor Hermione cared much about it.
Look, it's none of your business. Dumbledore'll see to it.
Hagrid cautioned, having to interrupt their discussion. Ivan nodded in agreement, despite the fact that the obstacles the various professors in the book had set up seemed like child's play to him. They might be able to stop Hogwarts students, but they would not be able to stop powerful adult wizards. However, the spell Dumbledore placed on the mirror was very powerful, and only those who wanted the stone and did not intend to use it would be able to get their hands on it. This meant that Chino and Voldemort would never have gotten what they wanted, even if they had stayed there for days and nights and blown up the mirror. Unfortunately, Ivan knew better than anyone that Harry and Ron didn't know about this, and that they had to do something about the fact that the Philosopher's Stone was hidden under the trapdoor and could be taken at any moment. In the end, the sensible Hermione proposed to go to Professor Dumbledore and tell him the whole story, leaving the decision to Dumbledore. Ivan wanted nothing more than to sit quietly and listen to their discussion, but the more he listened, the more he felt something was wrong.
I think there's something wrong with the cake we had for lunch.
Chapter 45, this is really touching. Before leaving, Hermione asked Hagrid for the headmaster's office password. Hagrid asked them not to talk to Dumbledore about hatching a dragon egg, and Harry agreed.
A cockroach pile.
In front of the hideous guardian stone beast, Hermione shouted the password to the headmaster's office, and the hidden passageway slowly opened. When they arrived at the headmaster's office, Ivan was no longer as flustered as he had been the first time. At the very least, he now knew occlumency, so he was able to make do with it, even if his level was not high. After all, there were 4 of them, and Dumbledore could not possibly concentrate on him.
Professor Dumbledore not here.
Harry asked in disappointment as the 4 of them entered the headmaster's office, where all the items were neatly arranged but there was no one in sight. Ivan was also confused. He assumed that Dumbledore had just finished listening to Snape's report. Had they gone to find Chino as soon as they heard? After a second of silent mourning for Chino, Ivan noticed something different about the headmaster's office than the last time he was there. There was also a large mirror that reached the ceiling, with brilliant golden patterns on the sides and a row of words carved into the top, supported by 2 claw-like feet. Ivan was obviously not the only one who found it, as it was placed so prominently in the mirror. Harry stood in front of the mirror in a daze for a long time.
Harry, what are you looking at?
Ron came over and patted Harry on the shoulder.
Can't you see, there are 2 other people in this mirror besides me, and I think they might be my parents.
Harry couldn't help but move forward slowly. In his eyes, his mother in the mirror reached out her arms to him, and Harry followed suit, but all he touched was the smooth, cold surface.
Why didn't I see your parents inside?
Ron asked as he joined them, curious as to what Harry's parents looked like.
What I saw was me becoming the head of the Students' Union, and that's great.
Ron described his handsome reflection in the mirror with his prefect badge, and happily told Harry that perhaps this mirror could foretell the future, and that the person in the mirror must be his future self. Hermione looked at Harry and Ron in the mirror with concern, and discreetly warned them not to look into it.
If you're trying to understand this, you'd better stay away from that mirror. It might be some dangerous dark magic item.
It can't be that bad, can it? We're in the headmaster's office.
Ron said loudly, but when he turned to see Harry staring at the camera, he felt a little guilty.
The mirror of Eris.
Ivan whispered, looking into the mirror. It seemed that his earlier suspicions were correct, and Dumbledore, a sly old fox, had no intention of placing the mirror or the stone where it belonged until he was certain that Harry would pass the test of the mirror of Eris.
The mirror of Eris, is that what it's called? Do you know it?
Harry asked anxiously, not bothering to remember his parents in the mirror.
I read about it in a book.
Ivan nodded but did not tell Harry that the book was called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
What does it do? Why can I see my parents in there?
Harry asked eagerly.
Is it possible to foretell the future or something? I'm sure I'll be a superior in the future, right?
Ron looked at Ivan expectantly. Harry did not believe Ron's story, as his parents were dead, and if the mirror could foretell the future, would they all come back to life?
The purpose of the Mirror of Eris is to evoke a person's deepest and most sincere desire, which is to see what you want the most.
Ivan explained, shaking his head in disagreement. Harry and Ron were both disappointed, which meant that what they saw was fake and they were just imagining it. However, the pair soon rallied and urged Ivan and Hermione to go to the Mirror of Eris and see what he wanted. Yvonne hesitated, but Hermione stepped forward first. After learning how to use the Mirror of Eris, she wanted to see what would appear in it.
Hermione, what did you see?
Yvonne asked.
It's just an ordinary mirror.
Hermione asked, looking at her reflection in confusion. It didn't seem to make any difference. Harry and the others were wondering if the mirror was broken when Hermione spoke.
No, it seems to have changed.
Ivan looked over curiously and saw Hermione blushing happily.
My front teeth are a little shorter in the mirror.
What kind of craving is that?
Harry and Ron were momentarily speechless. They would have been more comfortable with a few bags of snacks in the mirror. Hermione didn't think so and was quite satisfied with her reflection in the mirror, which was exactly what she wanted anyway.
Actually, I think you're quite good-looking right now.
Yvonne laughed. She hadn't expected Hermione's greatest desire to have her front teeth repaired, even though they were cute when they were longer.
Really?
Hermione's sudden happiness seemed to deepen her already flushed face. Harry and Ron, sensing that something was amiss, urged them on as if they were unnecessary.
Ivan, why don't you go up and take a look?
Yes, we're all curious as to what you might see.
Yvonne nodded, her interest piqued, and went to look in the mirror where Harry had left her. Yvonne expected to see her future self punching Dumbledore and kicking Voldemort, but there was none of that. In the mirror was a small sitting room with an ordinary-looking family of 3, and in the middle of the room was a boy who looked nothing like Ivan. The boy's face was ruddy and lively, and he was holding a shiny university acceptance letter in his hand. His parents were happily gathered around him, talking about something. Ivan could not hear their voices, but he could tell that they were very happy. It was a sight Ivan had never seen before, and he had always believed that his life before his transmigration consisted of a white ward, his parents' grim faces, and the unpleasant smell of disinfectant.
Ivan, what do you see in the mirror?
Harry noticed that Ivan's eyes were watering, so he gently patted him. Ivan came to his senses and wiped his eyes, then spoke to them briskly.
I've just seen myself graduate and become Minister for Magic. It's so touching.
Chapter 46, Professor, Where's Your Integrity? Ron didn't know what to say to Ivan, who could move him.
There's no shame in looking pain in the face.
It was Dumbledore's voice, and Ivan recognized it immediately. The next moment, occlumency was at full power, and 100 GPA had been used to activate the Academic Genius Experience card. Dumbledore, with his long white hair and beard, was standing quietly at the door to the headmaster's office.
Professor,
Said Harry in surprise and then with some trepidation, as they had used the mirror without permission. Dumbledore was not looking at them, but at the Mirror of Eris, and Ivan could not see any clue in Dumbledore's eyes, except that he had been looking at it for a while. Dumbledore stepped forward and placed his hand on Harry's head, then looked at Ivan.
Hales was right. This is the Mirror of Eris, which allows us to see our deepest and most urgent desires. In the past, many people have been lost in these false visions, wasting their time and even becoming obsessed with them, because they do not know if they are real and if they are possible.
Dumbledore added.
Hales, would you mind telling me what you saw in the mirror?
Dumbledore asked suddenly. Ivan hesitated for a moment, trying to think of an excuse to get away with it, but in the end, he decided to tell the truth.
Family? Yes, I should have known.
Dumbledore murmured, seeming moved.
What did you see in the Mirror of Eris, Professor?
Yvonne asked, not wanting to keep Dumbledore thinking.
I saw myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks.
Said Dumbledore.
There are never enough socks.
Dumbledore went on.
I expected to receive a few pairs for Christmas, but they insisted on sending me books.
Ivan pursed his lips. He understood that Dumbledore was using wool socks as a metaphor for family, but he couldn't help but complain in his heart. Who was the one who said to face the pain? "Professor, where is your integrity?" Having been delayed for a while, Harry was able to shake off his excitement and reluctance to see his parents in the mirror and remember what he had come to do.
Professor, we're here to report that a mysterious man in a black robe obtained information from Hagrid about how to get past Fluffy. It's highly likely that he was trying to sneak through the trapdoor to steal the Philosopher's Stone you left down there.
Harry blurted it out, then decided it wasn't enough to convince them, and told them about his broom being controlled during a Quidditch match and Snape's calf injury after Halloween. Ron and Hermione were also there to fill in the details.
Don't worry, you can sit down and talk.
Dumbledore said, as if he already knew and wasn't the least bit surprised. He waved his wand and 4 chairs materialized, which he gestured for them to sit down. Harry and the others nodded, and Dumbledore waited until they were seated before speaking.
Can you first tell me where you learned about the Philosopher's Stone?
"Aren't you the one who left the clues?" Ivan thought to himself, but in case Harry and the others said something they shouldn't have, he spoke before they could.
We learned from Hagrid that there was a connection between what was hidden under the trapdoor and a man named Nicholas Flamel.
Who do you think would do such a thing?
Dumbledore asked, nodding in agreement with Ivan's explanation.
We suspect it's Snape, or maybe Professor Chino.
Harry said quickly. Dumbledore did not reply this time, remaining lost in thought for a long time.
Don't you trust us, Professor?
Ron asked anxiously.
No, of course I trust you,
said Dumbledore, stroking Ron and the others.
But I also trust the professors at the school. They would never do such a thing.
Harry opened his mouth to retort, but Dumbledore waved him off. Norway wasn't the only one using the stone. Every professor placed a protective measure under it, including Snape and Chino.
So the stone is safe down there.
Dumbledore added.
Then, if there were no enemies, why did you bring the stone to the school and set up so much protection there?
Ivan asked, easily finding a loophole in Dumbledore's story. Having found an opportunity to report Chino, Ivan, of course, was frantic in hinting that Dumbledore should get rid of this potential threat. Wouldn't it hurt your conscience to hand over a professor-level enemy who was still connected to the Dark Lord to a young wizard like him? Ivan grumbled to himself, but did not forget to run a clumency at full speed to create plausible false memories. This is because during the previous quiz, Ivan was keenly aware of Dumbledore's 3 attempts at Dementor, which involved Harry telling stories about the Philosopher's Stone and asking who they suspected. Of course, none of the 3 probing memories lasted very long, presumably just to check if they were lying or hiding something. It was thanks to the experience card mode, the extraordinary bonus to a clumency, and Dumbledore's lack of effort that Ivan was able to hide his true feelings.
That's because I happened upon the news that a very dangerous man was trying to get his hands on the Philosopher's Stone, but it wasn't Snape, or Chino, as you call him.
Dumbledore gave Ivan an appreciative look but did not explain further, instead getting up and looking into the mirror of Eris.
Anyway, thank you for your warning. I'll get the other professors to pay more attention. You guys go back first.
After confirming that Dumbledore had no intention of disposing of Chino, Ivan wanted to be on his way. He did not want to be in Dumbledore's presence for even a second longer. Harry opened his mouth to say more, but decided against it and left the office with the others. After the 4 of them left the headmaster's office, Dumbledore stood in front of the mirror for a long time, lost in thought.
Severus,